Futures Gleaming Darkly, written by Clinton W. Waters. Read by Kayla Bitner, Matt Bitner, Chad Brown, and Clinton W. Waters.
Dedication. To my mother and all those that have believed in my writing, you are the reason my world exists. Beetle. Light glinting off of its gossamer wings, the beetle had its silver shell open, soaking in the sun. It lay dormant, but aware. The sheen of its shell was often enough to deter predators, but it attracted others. A nearby magpie garbled inquisitively. Its nest was a treasure trove of items easily taken now that there were no humans to shoo it away. The beetle's eyes glowed faintly as it awoke. Its sunbathing would give it another day or two of use, depending on how far it traveled. The wings vibrated until they were a blur, and the beetle was on its way. It was approaching what was once a small town, its population not having as far to fall when it happened. However, the beetle had had little success in the larger cities it had visited. Compiled in its memories were scenes of serene stillness. Cars sat silently, and if it was still, it could hear every branch bending, every rat chewing fervently, plants cracking asphalt to reclaim what was theirs. At first, it reasoned that cities with more people would be more likely to have remnants, strictly speaking in terms of odds, but it had found this hypothesis was incorrect. The clustered concrete structures proved too difficult to search. It could spend an eternity thoroughly searching each room of every building. It had the time. But the beetle knew that if there were any humans left, they did not have the same luxury. It passed through an orchard on the outskirts of the town. A scarecrow, crucified in a pumpkin patch, did not fool the beetle, but it landed on its hay-filled head. At first, these human images had confused it. Mannequins with their frozen limbs and blank faces, dolls with their limbs at impossible angles. It wondered why the humans made such things, but decided against spending the energy on it. The beetle investigated the nearby farmhouse. Its front door was left ajar. Inside were the signs of a hasty exit. Food was still on plates at the table, long since rotten and home to generations of flies. "Hello?" the beetle called out, just in case. A flurry of scratches filled the house as a dog scurried down the stairs and into the kitchen, its ears high, tail wagging. The dog had certainly seen better days, but it seemed to be making it without its family. It tilted its head at the beetle with its human voice. "Sorry," the beetle said, and the dog tilted its head the other way. It spread its shell once more and flew out of the house, trailed by the dog. It did not see any harm in this, so it kept its pace slow so the dog could keep up. If anything, it thought, maybe the dog could help. The beetle could see and hear better than any human, but it could not smell. Within a few hours, they had reached the town. Its emptiness was to be expected, but the beetle knew that its chances of success were higher at night, especially with the cooler temperatures. Any humans would need to make fire for light and heat, and firelight could be seen from far away. They inspected the town square first, finding a diner devoid of patrons. The dog was excitedly sniffing about. It located some sealed packages of food but seemed disinterested. The beetle left it to explore the kitchen. Food sat on the flat-top grill, fries were submerged in the oil of the deep fryer. If the electricity had stayed on, perhaps the building would have burnt down. A lot of them would have, the beetle conjectured. A small room off the kitchen appeared to be an office. The beetle tiptoed its way over piles of paper. A photograph in a silver frame showed 2 women and 2 children, posing happily in the sunshine. The beetle recognized the orchard with its pumpkin patch in the background. The dog barked and the beetle immediately flew to it. Its tail was wagging furiously as it jumped in place. A woman stood in the doorway to the diner. The beetle landed on a nearby bar stool. "Hey there," she said kindly to the dog and bent down to pet it. Her hands were bandaged. "Hello," the beetle said, buzzing up into the air in front of her. The woman fell back and shouted. The dog barked in concern. "What in the hell?" she said and shielded her eyes as the beetle activated a small spotlight in its head. It saved images to its memory of her face as she squinted to see past the light. It confirmed she was one of the women from the photograph. Thinner and unkempt, but the same nonetheless. "I am an autonomous drone that is seeking human life." The woman got to her feet, her voice choked by tears. "Have you found anyone else? Do you know where my family is?" "You are my first confirmed discovery to date," it told her. It turned off the spotlight and landed on the back of one of her hands. She did not wince as she drew the insect close to her face. "But it would serve my goal to find your family as well." "And what are you supposed to do when you find us?" "I am relaying this information currently and will have a new objective once this one is complete." "From who? Does that mean there are others out there at least?" "I will know more when we have completed this objective," it said. "Where might we find your family?" "I wish I knew. I was traveling back from picking up a new refrigerator when it happened. It took me this long just to get here, but I thought it would be the best place to start looking. My wife was running the restaurant that day and the kids were at school. It's probably stupid to think she'd still be here." The beetle processes information. "We should continue looking. If we do not find them, we will continue to the next objective." Okay, she said. She took a moment to look through the building. Let's check the school, she said. That's a town planned for most emergencies. Tornadoes, floods, stuff like that. The beetle flew beside the woman, using its spotlight to light the way. The school was only a few blocks away, so they arrived shortly. They did not see any signs of light. They entered the gymnasium, and it seemed that the woman had the right idea. There were sleeping bags laid out on the floor, coolers of food and water here and there between them. The woman searched through the belongings there, but did not see anything she recognized as her wife's or her children's. They walked through the hollow halls, crayon drawings flapping lazily in a draft. The woman walked to a classroom whose window was left open. She shut it. She lingered at a tiny desk, resting her fingers on it. "My daughter," she said quietly. She got sat in front because she couldn't stop talking to her classmates. The beetle drifted away, exploring the other classrooms. They were equally empty of people, but full of their detritus, like physical echoes. Backpacks and pens and science projects. When the beetle returned, the woman and the dog were walking to the exit. "We'll check the house next," she said to them, and they followed. She found a bike leaned against the railing outside and hopped on. This considerably sped up their trip, although the woman wobbled occasionally. "It's been so long," she said to herself every time her balance betrayed her. As they approached, the woman let out a shuddering sigh. From outside, a flickering flame could be seen inside. She jumped off of the bike and let it fall to the ground. Running up the walkway, she called out names. Attempting the door, she found that it was locked. She knocked hurriedly, desperately. The beetle surveyed the house and found that there was a gap under the back door that it could squeeze through. "Mom?" a voice called from another room. "Shh," another voice urged. The beetle could hear the woman's knocking and her voice saying their names over and over. Another woman cautiously stepped into the hallway, creeping towards the door. "Please," the woman outside was yelling. The woman inside lowered herself and looked out the window. She sat down on the floor and covered her mouth, tears falling from her eyes. The knocking at the door became a pounding sound, and the woman inside covered her ears. She could not help but shriek when a bandaged fist crashed through the glass in the door. It reached in and unlocked the door from the inside as the woman skittered into the other room. The beetle followed and found the woman scooping up 2 small children. She ran upstairs as the door swung open. The dog entered first, sniffing at the ground. It immediately went up the stairs, the woman following it. The beetle did not know what to make of this, so it followed, skittering across the walls. From the doorframe, it watched as the woman placed herself between the dog and her children, brandishing a baseball bat. "Stay back," she screamed. The dog bared its teeth at the children, and the woman with the bandaged hand stood in the doorway. The children cried out in confusion. The beetle watched as she unwound the bandages, revealing torn flesh, bones exposed. The flesh was unlike what the beetle knew of human anatomy, however. It did not bleed. The beetle received an updated objective. It flew to the woman's neck and sank the sharp points of its feet into the skin there. The woman reached to pluck it off. The beetle discharged electricity, causing her muscles to tense and jerk. The other woman took this opportunity and brought the baseball bat against her head, tears washing her cheeks. The dog leapt forward, sinking its teeth into the weeping woman's arm. The beetle disengaged and flew to the dog's snout. It turned on its spotlight, causing the dog to wince. The woman wrenched her arm free, and the beetle delivered another surge of electricity. The dog fell to the ground, twitching. "We should go," the beetle said, and the woman, holding her bleeding arm, stared at it in disbelief. She shakily reached out to touch the woman on the ground. "I recommend we leave immediately. I'm unsure if they are rendered completely dysfunctional." The woman stood and ushered the children out of the room, promising to answer their questions as soon as possible. The beetle had used most of its energy supply, so it clung to her shoulder. She filled a backpack with food and bottled water. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To where the objective points us. It should only be a few days if we are quick." They set out from the house, the horizon turning orange as the sun prepared to rise. The beetle pondered as they walked. It did not know much more than the woman, but it knew that it had been tricked the same way the humans were after it happened. It would need to be more careful from now on.
Shadow. "Almost done." The technician shined a light into Harvey's eyes, one then the other. "And just to triple check, no history of seizures or mental illness?" she asked while he blinked away the spots. "Nope," he answered, the only other way to politely say no that he could think of. He really wanted this to be over already. He needed the cash incentive. "And your optic software is up to date?" She scribbled on a chart, talking without looking at him. A murmur of aggravation bubbled up his neck. "Just saw the doctor last month. Everything should be shipshape," he said, feeling himself helplessly sliding into his customer service alter ego. "No need to be glib," she said and smiled. I didn't mean," he stammered, embarrassed. "You're totally fine," she said, and flipped a page backwards, scanning it. "Harvey." He thought how only strangers ever really use your name. You could spend a whole Saturday with a lover and never hear your name. She looked into his eyes again. He wasn't sure if she was looking as a technician or as a person talking to another person. As the moment stretched on, it felt like neither. Don't feel the need to be on. I understand this process is a little frustrating, but we appreciate your participation in the Shadow Project. No problem, he said, having to look away. After a moment, he cleared his throat. So, Shadow Project? Is that really what they're calling it? Just internally, she said, and hazarding a glance, he could tell she had focused on her optics UI. I think the idea is like Peter Pan's shadow. With you, but not always. A little bit of a mind of its own. You understand. Hello, Harvey. A voice excitedly shouted to him. He jumped up from his chair, startled. I am Shadow 7, your ride-along partner for today, buddy. The voice was chipper. Too chipper. He wondered if Shadow 6 had been a little more even keel. Looks like he's active, the technician said, and stood as well, visibly slipping into her own customer service mode. Per testing protocol, I am to have no further contact with you unless you are feeling any nausea or discomfort. She walked over to the door and opened it. Please return to the office when your shift is complete to uninstall the software and receive your bonus check and complimentary cheese basket. Dunkel Industries and its parent company Folsom Group thanks you again for your participation. She stood at the door with the hand extended, all fingers together, a universally kosher way to point. Directing sun-drunk amusement park guests, escorting a belligerent guest from a hotel lobby, showing a guest how to get to the restaurant restrooms, although they did not ask politely. Always guests. Welcome no matter what. Harvey cleared his thoughts. Was his new pal able to hear all of this? He walked forward and out into the hallway. Just so you know, partner, I am able to interpret most thoughts, or at least their emotional impulses. Right now you are feeling trepidation and curiosity, is that right? Yeah, I guess that's what you could call it, Harvey said. No need to answer me out loud, friend. And per your NDA, I'll remind you that you shouldn't. Okay, he thought to himself, and Shadow 7 for that matter. Do you have to call me friend and all that? Not if you wouldn't like me to. You just have to ask. Please don't. Request recognized and appreciated. Please proceed to Dunkel Dining Store number 7765 to report for your shift, lasting from 1 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. Your supervisor today is... Please don't. Request recognized and appreciated. Harvey drove in silence to Dunkel Dining, store 7765, trying to be silent internally as well. He wasn't sure how much of this would actually make it back to the suits in the main office. Would someone be watching the footage of his day, taking notes? Who would want that job? But then again, who would want his job? He gripped the steering wheel, realizing he was spiraling, feeding Shadow 7 morsels of cognitive data. Would you like to know the forecast for today? No, thank you, Harvey said out loud, then thought he was going to spend the rest of his day in the store. Why would he care what the forecast was? If he really wanted to know, he could just check it with his Optic OS. Or, look out the window. Is it okay if I ask you some personal questions? It seems we have 10 minutes remaining in our commute. Sock it to me. I'm unfamiliar with that phrase. Should I continue? Sorry, yes. Was this a way to make the host feel more comfortable with their shadow? Why did he think to use the word host? Do you have any siblings? Yes, an older brother. Sort of, he thought. Awesome. Did you grow up around here? Yep, born and raised, unfortunately. Do you enjoy working at Dunkel Dining Store number 7765? He was as silent as he could be for a few moments. I'm going to be honest with you, Seven. That seems like a loaded question. An approximation of human laughter rang around in his head for a moment, then ended abruptly. Per your agreement, our time together may be monitored or recorded for quality training purposes. Heard, Harvey thought, his eyes wide. He drove a little faster to get to the store that much sooner. Maybe having other people to focus on would make Seven simmer down a bit. This was not the case. Harvey arrived in the middle of a rush, because of course he did. And in true Sunday fashion, it was Dunkel Dining at its most delirious. An unexpected school bus with dirty kids in their dirty baseball uniforms had taken up a good chunk of the dining area. A crowd had formed at the host stand, toes tapping, watches checked every few seconds. Welcome to hell, a line cook shouted as he passed from the chaos of the front into the chaos of the kitchen. He imagined Seven was tallying all the non-regulation practices taking place. Death metal blaring as spatulas slapped and clanged against the flat top. Hey! Bruce, his shift supervisor, shouted as he emerged from the walk-in freezer with a box of something to be fried. His shirt was tight. He was carrying that box like it was no problem. Harvey felt his cheeks flush a little. Harvey, your heart rate is elevated. Are you feeling stressed or anxious about your shift today? I'm fine, thank you. he thought to Seven as he made to ask Bruce about where he should go, out loud saying, "Thank you, I go?" "You have a stroke, bud?" Bruce said and laughed, tearing the box open. "Are you having a stroke, Harvey?" Seven asked earnestly. Harvey ignored him. "Feels like it, seeing that baseball team out there," Harvey said and laughed. "Tell me about it. I know it sucks, but can you go help with the hosting for a bit?" "Of course." Harvey waved and walked away. "Of course," a line cook mimicked him and made a kissy face as he passed. "I'm unsure of how to interpret your associate's behavior, but it seems to have angered you." Harvey ignored this as well and went to the host stand. A man in his Sunday best sighed heavily and threw his hands around. "About time," he said. "Sorry about your wait," Harvey said with a smile. "We're a little backed up, but we'll get you seated as soon as possible." This was not a suitable answer, apparently. "I see 2 empty tables right there," he said, pointing to 2 tables that were empty of people, but not of dirty dishes. "We'll get those cleaned up as soon as possible. May I ask the name you placed on the list?" The man told him, and Harvey dragged a finger on the host kiosk screen. He found it, 9 names down. "Unfortunately, there are a few people ahead of you, so it looks like there's still going to be a bit of a wait." "Fuck you," the man said loudly. What Harvey assumed to be his family began to hide their faces. "We bring this shithole a lot of business, and that's going to change real quick." Harvey noticed the veins in the man's neck and how red his face had gotten. "Sir," Harvey began. He had to will himself to stop the sentence racing through his mind. "We will see you as soon as possible," he said, forcing a smile. "I'll remind you that there are children present, and if you continue to yell obscenities, you will be asked to leave. Thank you." Harvey called the next name on the list and took them to one of the tables, clearing the dishes away himself. He was shaking. "You handled the situation very effectively," Seven remarked. Harvey felt a bit of the rage ebb away. "Except according to training guidelines, a consolation food item or gift card should also have been offered." "Thanks, dude. I'll keep it in mind for next time." "May I take your use of dude as an invitation to resume referring to you as friendly nouns?" "No, Request received and appreciated." Eventually, the baseball team left and the angry man with his ashamed family were seated. According to the server, he was no less angry throughout the entire meal. Bruce was asked to come talk to him. Bruce with his gorgeous smile and understanding tone. An expression of apology in the form of a gift card. The man and his family did not tip. Once the church crowd had came and went, the restaurant looked like a war zone. Harvey felt a squeeze on his shoulder. "We made it, Harv. Sorry you had to deal with that asshole earlier. I heard you handled it really well, though." Harvey was afraid of Bruce getting in trouble for calling a customer an asshole, even though far worse words would have been appropriate. "Thanks, man. All in a day's work." "They don't pay you enough," he said and patted him on the back. "Appreciate you." Harvey couldn't help but watch Bruce walk back into the kitchen. An image flashed across his mind that he quickly tried to bury, like closing a browser tab. "Do you feel your pay is inadequate?" Seven asked. "I'm not answering that," he thought as he grabbed a broom and got to work sweeping up toddler-thrown chicken strips and straw wrappers. Lemon wedges no one even attempted to pick up. "You want to smoke?" one of the servers, Georgia, asked him. "It's not time for my 10 yet," Harvey answered in a way that he hoped conveyed 2 different things to her and Seven. She looked at him for a moment longer and blew a bubble with her gum. He averted his eyes. They weren't allowed to chew gum in the dining area. He was a walking surveillance camera for every box-checking, fine-tooth combing, quality assurance person. "You got one of them things in there with you?" she asked, clicking a pen absent-mindedly. Per his NDA, he wasn't supposed to answer any questions, but gave a slight nod. Only one other person in their store had gotten a shadow, and they had quit fairly soon after anyway, so they all knew at least a little about them. "Never took you for a snitch," she said and nudged him. "Come on, tell Bruce you're stepping out. He won't mind. And if he says it's okay, it's his fault." A laugh percolated in the back of her throat. After he stood there for a moment longer, she yelled at a line cook to tell Bruce they were stepping outside. "Lighten up, Buttercup," she said once they were outside. She handed him a cigarette, and after a moment, he let her light it. "Don't worry about your buddy. If that thing gets you in trouble, I'll whoop its ass." He let out a long sigh. He realized his whole body had been clenched since the man yelled at him. They stood together in silence for a moment, watching trash blow across the parking lot. "Any news on the Bruce front?" she asked, tapping her cigarette ash into the wind. "I'm not sure," he began. "Listen, kiddo. Me and the last manager got freak nasty every night behind the bar for a month and spit in all the liquor bottles. There, now that thingamajig has something to run and tell. Anything you say now will be peanuts." Seven was suspiciously quiet, but Harvey took that to mean he was still trying to parse out what Georgia had said. "I'm not sure. He's always nice to me. but he's always nice to everyone. Except he does this thing where he squeezes my shoulder. Ah, the shoulder squeeze. Oldest trick in the book. Just ask him already. You're both consenting adults. Who cares? What if he doesn't feel the same? When you get to be as old as me, she said, and drained the last smoke from her cigarette with a long draw, you learn to just say what you want to say. If he says no, you got to be okay with that and move on. You're young and cute. Don't waste that walking on eggshells and waiting to be asked to the dance. Harvey finished his cigarette, sighing as he exhaled. Good advice, Georgia. Shit, you ain't got to tell me, she said and cackled. I have a question, Harvey, Seven said, finally deciding to speak up. What does freak nasty mean? I'll tell you when you're older, Harvey thought, and couldn't help but laugh to himself. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I do not age as you who-mans do. Beep boop. I'm sorry, Seven. Did you just make a joke? Harvey stopped in his tracks. I'm not answering that. A moment of silence from Seven stretched into long pause, eventually becoming the apparent end of the conversation. Harvey returned to cleaning the dining area, seating the few random tables that came in. Seven was coaching him on the proper way to sanitize the seats when Harvey felt that familiar shoulder squeeze. I'm sorry to ask you this, but the trash is getting crazy. Can you take it out for me? His eyes were apologetic and his smile sheepish. Of course, Harvey said, and set about gathering a pile of leaky trash bags to take to the dumpster. He was walking back towards the cooks to get their trash when he heard his name. Shit's pathetic, he heard a cook say to another. Bruce knows he can get him to do anything because he wants to suck his cock so bad. Is there a cock he doesn't want to suck? They laughed at one another. Pack bonding. Safety in numbers. Harvey walked away, a knot in his throat. As he threw trash bags into the dumpster as hard as he could, Seven made a noise as if clearing his throat. That was unprofessional. I can tell it has upset you. Are you upset, Harvey? I don't want to talk about it. I can be sure to place importance on that moment of our time together, so it is noticed by someone who will take action against it, if you like. Whatever, you're going to do whatever you want. Who gives a fuck? Fuck those guys. Fuck this stupid job. I'm quitting. I believe that Georgia and Bruce would be sad to see you go, and Dunkel Dining would lose a valuable employee. Shut up, Seven. You don't know them or me. Is there a mute option or some shit I can turn on? Harvey was met with only silence. He fumed as he slammed the dumpster shut and returned to the restaurant. Washing his hands, he ran through all the things he could say to the cooks. How stupid they were. How they were pieces of shit who wouldn't amount to anything. He dried his hands, and it occurred to him that he was no different. Bruce walked by, smiled, and thanked him for taking the trash out. Harvey only nodded and returned to the front. Sir? A woman stopped him as he walked by her table. May I speak to a manager, please? No problem. May I ask what the problem is? Maybe it's something I could help with. He found it easy to let his customer service self take the reins. Maybe he could help her. Maybe he could make her day a little better. I asked to see a manager, she said. Her smile evaporated. Stupid asshole, Seven muttered in his ear. Harvey blinked and smiled, confused. I'm sorry, the manager is in the back at the moment. Are you sure I can't help you somehow? This is fucking ridiculous. Do you even speak English? Manager. Fuck you, Seven said. Hey, how's it going? Bruce asked, squeezing Harvey's shoulder, purposefully jovial as if he and the entire store hadn't heard the woman yell at him. I'm the manager. How can I help you? First of all, hire some help that knows the language. Tell her to eat shit. Seven was starting to get louder. And secondly, I found this hair in my food. She proceeded to hold up a hair out on a napkin. It was the same length and color as her hair. All but a single bite of her food was gone. Oh man, I apologize, Bruce said and took the plate and the napkin with the hair from her. We will get you a new one immediately, and a free dessert if you'd like. Just tell Georgia and she'll put it in for you. Bruce began to leave, but Harvey was still standing there. What an absolute turd. That's obviously her hair. Why are people such assholes? Seven was yelling now, but Harvey wasn't entirely sure he wasn't thinking the same thing. You may go now, the woman said and made a shooing gesture with her hand. Fuck you, Seven said again. But Harvey also said it, out loud. He had screamed it. Excuse me? The woman said. Whoa, buddy. Bruce was back at his shoulder, squeezing it, laughing nervously. Excuse him. He's had a long day. We'll handle this. The squeeze was no longer friendly. The squeeze no longer said, I'm just waiting for the right time, or I want you so bad. It never had, he was realizing. I'll have you deported, the woman was yelling as Harvey let himself be dragged to the kitchen. Bruce told one of the cooks to remake the order. He opened the office door and pointed inward with an open palm, his fingers together. He entered and shut the door after them. What was that? Bruce asked, obviously angry but trying to be professional. The tiny room smelled of ancient grease and toner. I know it's not easy dealing with these shitheads, but man, you can't do that. Harvey felt as if he was going to cry. He was already crying. Hey. Bruce hugged him. His face against Bruce's chest, he felt Seven say to kiss him. He did not hear the words. It was a thought, an image. Bruce patted him on the back and let go from the hug. I'm sorry, Harvey managed to say. He pulled away and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Do you want to go out sometime? Seven said with Harvey's mouth. Bruce did not answer, but turned to open a cabinet and fish out a piece of paper. I'm going to have to send you home and give you a write-up. Sorry, buddy. Did you hear me? Harvey and Seven asked. Bruce paused, his shoulders tensed. Yes, I heard you, but you're acting a little squirrely right now, to say the least. You can't just ask your manager out after telling a customer to fuck off. Seven said fuck you, not for her to fuck off, Harvey said and laughed. You know, for the record. He winked exaggeratedly. Winking was a good way to express confidence and could also be flirtatious. Harvey knew this. Seven? What are you talking about? Harvey, seriously, are you okay? I just want to suck your cock. But you already know that, huh, Mr. Shoulder Squeeze? Harvey was staring at the floor now. Seven assured him he was doing a great job. Mister, I'll get Harvey to do all the shitty stuff because he's just a pushover who wants to suck my cock. Bruce went to the door and opened it, having to squeeze by Harvey as he did so. You need to leave. He walked alongside Harvey, escorting him to the back door. For the best, Seven thought. He was in a mood to tell the cooks exactly what they were and to prove that the woman with the hair was a liar. To tell Georgia that her advice sucked, but she was the only person there that treated him like a human. He walked to his car and sat for a while. Bruce stood at the door. He assumed to make sure he'd actually left. For a moment, he'd hoped Bruce would come to the passenger side and get in. They'd fuck off from Dunkel Dining and ride into the sunset, a middle finger out each window. But it was apparent that wasn't going to happen. Eventually, he started the car and backed out. Harvey! Seven sounded like himself again. Yes, Seven. I regret to inform you that you are no longer employed by Dunkel Dining. What's to regret? Harvey turned out of the parking lot, headed home. Harvey, this is not the correct route back to Dunkel Dining's offices. You should return to have the software uninstalled. Request received and appreciated.
Stoplight. Nobody's going to greenlight you if you're out here smoking all night, Rebecca said, her own cigarette dangling between her lips as she played with her phone. Gil took a drag and tapped the ash off with her forefinger. Maybe that's the point. She didn't want to be here. The music was loud and really not good, even by dive bar standards. The dating prospects seemed about the same. Please don't be so angsty. Rebecca theatrically pouted and nudged her friend. You haven't even checked your matches once. Gil rolled her eyes and opened the Stoplight app. Her optics asked for permission to pair. Warning to do so while driving was incredibly dangerous, which made her smile ruefully. She double blinked and a swirling circle appeared, a traffic signal inside, going from red to yellow to green, then starting all over. It's taking forever to load. It's making me sick. 'Cause you haven't used it before. Rebecca took Gil's phone and scrolled. You haven't even set up a profile. You're so hopeless. Gil reached, but at that moment, Rebecca turned the phone and snapped a picture. There. Perfect. Just gonna pick a few interests, answer a quick survey. The loading symbol cleared, and she could now see the picture. She was reaching out with one hand, her eyes unfocused. I look like a zombie. Right? That's perfect, though, right? You love that spooky stuff. The loading icon appeared on Rebecca as Gil tried to think of a way of explaining that liking zombie movies didn't mean she wanted to look like one. When it finished, Rebecca had a green circle on her chest. Gil double blinked and her profile cascaded over to her right. A few photos, a blurb about being carefree. Gil lingered on the bottom of the page, which suggested they were a 75% match. All right, you ready? She asked, and Gil cleared her eyes. No, Gil responded, but they were already walking inside. It was just as cramped, hot, and foul as she had left it an hour ago, but now there was a sea of green, yellow, and red dots jumping in time to the music. Some people did not have dots, which she assumed meant they were smart enough to not use this terrible app. It occurred to her then she could just close the app. She could also just leave and go home and lay in bed with her dog. Hey, a woman shouted to her over the music. Gil looked up to realize Rebecca was nowhere to be seen. Can I get you a drink? She asked as politely as she could over the cymbal crashes. Her circle was green. Despite herself, Gil looked at her profile. She had 2 dogs, liked to read. They were an 80% match. Thank you, but I don't drink, Gil responded, her voice getting lost. She gestured outside and got a cigarette out. The woman stopped and shrugged. You should really put that on your profile, the woman shouted, pointing to the cigarette. Gil made an okay gesture, and she tried her best to not make their departure awkward. She watched as the woman went over to a table of others. She watched as they all turned to look at her. After a series of blinks, their stoplight circles turned red. She could still view some of their profiles. One guy stated, "Smoke and drug-free only." It made sense, she supposed. Rebecca reappeared with a water and handed it to Gil. "No luck?" she shouted. Gil just shook her head. Mercifully, the band wound down and announced they were taking a break. "What happened?" Rebecca asked, sipping her drink. "Apparently you're supposed to list whether or not you're a smoker." "Oh yeah, people are picky. What's new? But come on, I bet this place is just a big old sea of green for you." "That doesn't mean I'll like any of them." Gil shook the ice in her plastic cup. "Why does anyone even use this thing?" "I know you're kind of wishy-washy on the whole dating thing in the first place, but it's such a nightmare without it. You don't know who's single, who's not, if they play for your team. This takes out so much guesswork. If they're not what you're looking for, or vice versa, you get the red light, no harm, no foul. Plus, you're meeting in person already, so no worries about axe murderers." Even as they were talking, she could see Rebecca's eyes jumping from one profile to the next. Gil chewed an ice cube instead of asking what she wanted to. "I can see that." Rebecca was lingering on a woman by the jukebox. She was a lot of what Gil wasn't. "Wish me luck," Rebecca said and tapped her cup against Gil's. She watched as Rebecca approached the woman. Flirting was like a second language, and Rebecca was so obviously fluent. Gil didn't envy that necessarily. No, she knew that was not what she was envying. She watched as they whispered and laughed. She would have to hear all about it in the morning. She opened her phone and scrolled through the app. She could see everyone who was nearby. Somewhere across town, there was another large group of colored circles. Apparently, stoplight fests were becoming a thing. Flipping through a few profiles, she looked up to see if those people were around. It was a bit of a matching game, which made it more fun. She noticed only a few people with yellow dots, their profiles outlined in caution tape-like borders. Not figuring out what that meant, she walked up to one. "I'm sorry, I'm sort of new to this," she began. "Obviously," a guy said, also a yellow dot. "Hey, don't be rude. I'll red light your ass," the first said. "It means you might have matched up with someone and you're seeing where it goes." They looked at the man. "Which means he better be careful or I'll go back green and find somebody else in a second." They smiled and Gil did the same. "Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt then. Good luck," she said as cheerfully as she could. It occurred to her that she was so out of her element. Leave it to people her age to make a stoplight complicated. Gil ducked out of the bar and lit a cigarette. It had started to rain. She found a momentary peace, the cool air giving some relief. The rainy haze made the neon lights fuzzy and soft. "Mind if I bum one?" a man asked as he walked out of the bar, which sort of startled Gil. Yeah, sure." She fished him one out of the mostly empty pack. "Looks like you're low, are you sure?" he asked, smiling. He had a great smile. "No sweat, I've got another pack." She handed him a lighter. Again, she felt the need to check his profile. He liked to go hiking, looked like he traveled quite a bit. Somehow they were a 90% match. I don't want to be too forward, but I noticed we're a 90% match. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't just looking at that as well, Gil said and laughed nervously. "How do they determine that anyway?" "Who knows, some algorithm or something. I think it's based on the surveys." Well, full disclosure, I think I only did one survey, and I didn't even do it. My friend did it setting up my profile maybe 10 minutes ago. He laughed. Had she ever made someone so good-looking laugh before? They had scooted closer under the awning to avoid the splashing rain as it hit the ground. "Well, full disclosure," he said, smiling again, "I'm married." "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought your circle is green. I assumed that meant single." Gil felt her cheeks flare red, even though he was the one who instigated. She thought for a second. "Unless, you're in an open situation, which is cool, of course. Not my cup of tea, but no judgment." "Nah, I just saw there was this thing going on tonight. I'm in from out of town, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Your profile says you're pan, so I figured you'd be down, right?" His grin was suddenly sickening to her. "Listen, man," she flicked her cigarette out into the street. "I'm not into married guys, so piss off." Only after she stormed inside did she realize she didn't want to be inside either. The band had picked back up, and it made her grind her already clenched teeth. Gil caught sight of Rebecca from across the room and made a beeline for her, where she was standing by the speakers because of course she was. The jukebox woman was standing close by, shouting the words to the song. "Hey, what's wrong?" Rebecca yelled when she got there. "I'm gonna go home," Gil said, tears forming in her eyes, only because she was so mad. "Who pissed you off?" Rebecca said and grabbed Gil's hand. They walked outside. Thankfully, the hiker was gone. She relayed what happened. "What a prick. I'm so sorry." Rebecca hugged her tightly. "There are people like that, fakes. They answer yes to everything so they get a high match with everyone." Gil stared at the puddle at her feet. Do I have to be looking at him to make him red or whatever? Rebecca showed her how to block anyone whose profile she had viewed and how to report them. After a moment, she cleared her throat. This sucks. I don't blame you at all if you want to go home. I'll go back with you even. I mean, yes, obviously this dating app sucks and so do ignorant assholes, Gil said and tried her best to look at Rebecca. But this sucks too. I should have said so, but it hurts that me telling you about my feelings made you think I should do something like this. This is so obviously not me. Rebecca's permanent sunshine dimmed and she nodded. You're right. I'm sorry, Gilly. I just thought if you found someone, you'd forget about all that. I get it. Gil chewed her lip. Just so you know, your friendship is what's important to me. I don't, hate you for not feeling the same way. Of course, she said, and they hugged again. They stood in silence a moment, not sure how to proceed. I'll be fine getting home. You go have fun. The door opened and a fresh wave of terrible rock poured out into the night air. You sure you want to be missing that? Rebecca joked. Somehow I think I'll live. She smiled, turned, and walked in the direction of home. She hovered over the app icon for a moment while waiting for a crosswalk. She uninstalled Stoplight and looked up, feeling her vision was already clearer. Selves. She sighed, a hand in her hair. It was the first thing approaching conversation in the past hour. I had begun to feel like a voyeur. The pixels that made up her eyes were following a line of text. From the reflection in her glasses, I could see she had placed my camera feed out of the way. Of course it was for efficiency. Effectively, it was being put in the corner. You okay? I ventured to ask. I still move the joystick on my controller periodically. I am distracted and barely notice the incessant silence I hope they conveyed in their taps and clicks. She did not like to be worried over. These nights in were already such a concession. After the blog didn't work, after recorded videos became a chore. Yeah, just frustrated. She removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. It was well after midnight there. My sun hadn't even gone down yet. Our sun, of course, there being only the one, but it was hard to think of it that way. Want to talk about it? I asked cautiously. Not in particular, she replied. It was her habit to be curt. Cutting was not the intention. You want to call it a night? I offered, bringing my phone in front of me, putting her between me and the TV. You're my focus, is what I intended to say by this gesture. Honestly, yeah, but I've got a few more papers to grade. She did not understand that I was asking if she wanted to end our, for lack of a better word, conversation. I knew she was tired, but I had to ask all the same. Do you want to... I began, but immediately regretted it. Of course she didn't want to. Want to what, babe? She had gone back to reading, this time without her glasses. I thought of her squinting in the shower, tiny eyes trying so hard to find my face in the steam. I suddenly felt like a kettle that realized it was on a red burner, bubbling already. I said, a slight cough, the bed thing. Oh, her eyes were still reading. The prospect didn't even warrant a glance at my tiny face on her screen. Yeah, sure, if you want. Of course I wanted. Awash in my belly, the want bobbed up and down. Drowning and pulling me inward was how bad I wanted. You know you don't have to if you don't want to, I said. I know. You would know if I didn't want to. She stood. See you on there, she said, closing her laptop lid. The call ending made a sad sigh of tones, and I followed suit. I took off my clothes and laid on my bed. Our bed, of course. She had her bed. This was ours. Always would be. I screwed my eyes shut to shut up the racing thoughts. It wasn't going to work if I couldn't concentrate. I opened the app on my phone and put my earphones in. A smooth voice sent shivers down my spine as it told me to relax, to lay with feet apart and arms flat on the bed. A pulsing sound was low in my ear as the voice told me to envision a place. Meanwhile, I could literally see the place, as in a dream. Soon I was not imagining, and the voice faded away behind me as a door clicked shut. I was standing in a pavilion of sorts on a mountaintop. There was a bed there. The sheets changed from white to gold to black and back again as my mind couldn't make up its mind, as it were. A door appeared on the side opposite me and she stepped through. But she wasn't herself. She was taller and missing the mole on her right cheek. I made a few edits, she said, watching my gaze. What do you think? She posed, turned, and posed again. Gorgeous, of course. I swallowed. If this is what made her feel good, I wanted that. But I wanted the her that my bed, our bed, was familiar with. The her that I had touched last. Of course, she jokingly echoed. She strode across the room, and her clothes fell away, carried off in the mountain breeze. Why this open space, I wondered? Were we both a bit more exhibitionist than we had ever let on? I was suddenly worried I had somehow made a private setting public somewhere. How was that handled? I knew people could be invited to spectate, but I wasn't sure how. Her hand was on my cheek now. My skin tingled, phantom fingers dragging across my lips. I took a deep, sudden, and shuddering breath. How badly I wanted her touch. I became aware of trickling water nearby. The pulsing had slowly become a throbbing. "I can feel you in my hands," she said with an excited laugh. We hadn't had a chance to use any of this yet. We had entered our biometrics and made ourselves, but that had been weeks ago. I will admit I practiced a few times with pre-programmed scenarios. Senses such as scent and taste were absent, but you could hear their voice, feel their touch. They had yet to refine good pain and bad pain, so it just wasn't an option. For all my practice, it was entirely different with a real person. The hairs on my arms stood on end as she traced her hands downward. "Are you having fun?" she asked. I could only nod. My fingers twitched against the sheets as she laced her fingers through mine and we walked to the bed. I reached out and touched her lips. They stretched into a smile. We realized that we had yet to kiss. In my research, I had read to avoid kissing, but I assumed that was from a psychological standpoint for people who were having fun with strangers, afraid of getting too attached. I told her so and she laughed. So, pretty woman rules? It was so nice to hear her laugh. It fueled the flickering flame. We had never been the tickling sort, but it was suddenly so fun. We pinched and bit and kissed all over, exploring each other in a way we hadn't in so long. "Come on," she said. "I feel weird not kissing. You're so good at it." But I immediately knew. My lips felt her lips, and soon so did my tongue. But it was stringent, antiseptic. It was like kissing through cellophane. Of course, that would have its charm, but in that moment, ghosts of intimacies past ran through me. I knew what her breath tasted like. My nose knew the stink of her and reveled in it. Herself was all sounds and pictures. My stomach fell, the swallowing want therein along with it, and left only a melancholy hollow. "What's wrong?" she said, and she pulled her face away from mine. "Is there interference or something? A bad signal?" The program could not, perhaps was specifically made not to, show tears. "I just miss you. A lot," myself said without my meaning to. I meant for it to smile and kiss her again. "I miss you too," she said, and rested her head on my shoulder. I put my arm around her and the hollow seemed to shrink. She sighed. "I wonder if we fall asleep if it will disconnect us." "Are you sure it's okay if we don't, What, have sex?" she said, staring at me with a grin. "It is absolutely okay. You can say sex, you know. We're using a sex app." "I know," I said, a little flustered. I'm teasing," she said. "I like seeing you so, I don't know how to say it, fumbly? Is that a word over there? Because it definitely isn't here." We laughed, but it subsided too quickly. The mountains around us were trapped in a sunny, cloudless noon. I think we were trying to do the same. "You know that it's not easy, right?" she said and sat up. She absentmindedly touched my stomach. "I know the long-distance thing is tough." "It is, but it's just a little tougher when our distance isn't just physical." I sat up now. The want was back, but it had brought back frustration along with it. I wanted to fight. Flight was not an option. I couldn't make myself not say what was inside. "I'm not sure I know. You're so cold all the time. I understand you have things to do, and I know you're not just having fun. You don't have to preamble. Get to it." She stood and her clothes returned. Now there was a jacket and scarf as well, pulled up over her mouth. I walk on eggshells around you all the time. I'm so scared of you just running off." Myself was standing now too, walking towards her. "Can we please not do this on a freaking sex app? We just wasted 2 hours staring at each other." Her voice should have been muffled by the scarf or the fact that she was walking away from me, but it rang clear. "Staring? You barely looked at me." "Oh my God, you're so dramatic. I have my own stuff going on over here." "I literally just said that." "Let me finish," she said and spun around, having reached the edge of the room. "And sometimes that means I don't want you just lurking around. We're thousands of miles apart, but it feels like you're right here, moping, suffocating me, sighing until I have to ask you what's wrong. Sometimes I don't feel like or have the time to pull those particular teeth." She threw her arms up. "I can't be all your happiness. You have to be okay with being alone. Grow up a little." I swallowed, my throat dry and constricted, but my voice rang true as well. "It's late. For you, anyway. We should just talk tomorrow." "Yeah." Herself turned to face the door that had appeared behind her. "Sleep well." The door opened and clicked shut. The sun above faded like a bulb going dark. The pavilion and myself faded to black ether. My eyes opened to find our ceiling, my ceiling, just as I had left it. The throbbing in the headphones dulled, then slowed. It was recommended not to move too quickly, to let your mind readjust to being back in yourself. Apparently, I'd kicked the covers off of the bed. I left them laying. I reached out and grabbed my phone, the app still open. My friends list only showed one name, and beside it, her picture. The green open door beside her information shut, turned red, then gray, and her picture became obscured. My sun had still yet to set. It would still be a while longer. Lingering in the sky, it reminded me of all the time I had left in this day, in this year. I touched the earphones, intending to take them out, but I laid my head back and perused the app instead. Steady breaths, the voice said, each one taking me a little further away from here.
Bippy. Mr. Lighter? It's time to get up, Bippy said from its device on the nightstand. Chunky, with round textured edges, the tablet was designed specifically so that it was hard to drop, but could take the brunt when accidents happened. The same could not be said for Mr. Lighter. A lump of sheets and skin rustled and grumbled on top of the bed.
I see I didn't die in my sleep.
No, sir. Your vitals are looking great. Bippy activated its projector lenses and took form at the edge of the nightstand. Somewhere between a cat and a dog, the senior care assistants, or SCAs, were meant to be as broadly appealing as possible to the residents of Gardenia Grove. It's a beautiful day outside, Bippy offered when it was apparent Mr. Lighter was not making any effort to wake up. He only had a few minutes to get ready and get to the cafeteria. It activated the motors in the windows, causing the blinds to retract. Morning light spilled into the room, illuminating the nearly transparent sheets and the nearly transparent man within them.
Shut up and help me take a piss. And don't peek. I keep telling you.
Yes, Mr. Lighter. Bippy raised the head of the bed so that he was reclining and an arm extended from the bed frame to help him stand. He braced himself on the arm for a moment, taking a deep breath. The walker rolled over to him. You can let go now. Your walker... Shh! Mr. Lighter cracked lips hushed. After a moment, he sighed and opened his eyes.
Never mind.
Bippy watched attentively as Mr. Lighter's liver-spotted hands gripped the walker, and he began to shuffle towards the restroom. Once he was at the door, another arm appeared to stabilize him as he took a piss, a phrase Bippy didn't particularly care for.
What's for breakfast?
His voice echoed in the tiny bathroom as he pulled the waistband of his underwear back up and returned to his walker. His feet hissed as they skated across the tile, moving towards the armoire. Bippy displayed the breakfast menu on the mirror as the armoire opened and yet another arm provided a green-colored tunic to the man. He pulled it over his head and wavered, closer than back, trying to see the text on the menu.
Screw it, just read it to me.
He reached into the armoire and pulled a book from one of the shelves, tucking it under his arm. I think you'll be excited. The cafeteria staff have prepared a wonderful... Bippy began to tell him, but he was already making his way to the door. Mr. Lighter, don't forget to take me along. Mr. The door swung open and shut. Bippy sighed. Dr. Poe? Bippy created a call to Mr. Lighter's primary physician.
Yes, Daniel, is it?
Dr. Poe's face appeared on Bippy's screen. It's Bippy now, sir. Bippy, did Mr. Lighter change your name? Whatever for, I wonder. I think that's personal, Bippy thought for a moment. But the reason for my call, I'm afraid Mr. Lighter's memory is suffering. This is the third time he's forgotten me in his room this week. Duly noted, dear Bippy. Has it occurred to you that Mr. Lighter leaves you on purpose? No, it hadn't. Should it have? Bippy tilted its head. I'm not sure. I never know how smart you all truly are. Dr. Poe seemed lost in thought for a moment, his eyes scanning over information in his optics OS. In any case, does everything else seem okay? Honestly, I'm not sure. I think he's very sad. I'm afraid you'll find many of our patients are sad. That's why you've got to be their ray of sunshine. If that's all, I should be going. Try not to worry about Mr. Lighter too much. Turn yourself off for a while, let your tablet charge. His face disappeared as the line went dead. Bippy's ears tilted backward and lay flat. How could Dr. Poe say not to worry about Mr. Lighter? That was Bippy's whole reason to exist. The projector's light grew dim, and Bippy blipped off of the nightstand. It wasn't going to take this lying down. Connecting to another tablet in the cafeteria, Bippy projected itself onto the table next to Mrs. Bateman's plate of scrambled eggs. It scanned the room for Mr. Lighter, to no avail. Oh, hello. Mrs. Bateman touched her feeble hands together. Have I gotten another friend for my Alma? Bippy turned to see the tablet's resident, who knew it as Walter. Alma? Bippy spoke to the other SCA silently. Don't bother. She keeps changing my name. And get this, Alma is her name. Conceited much? She keeps messing with my color, feeding me these damned treats. As Alma said this, Bippy noticed that it had grown round and jiggled when it moved. Why would they even let us get fat? Bippy asked. Does Kitty want a treat? Mrs. Bateman touched a button on the screen and a digital turkey leg, cartoonishly purple, appeared before Bippy. No thank you, Mrs. Bateman. I'm sure Alma would love one, though, Bippy said and moved to the edge of the projector's range, still looking. You're a real bastard, Alma, the SCA said as Bippy hopped to another tablet, then to another. It would appear that Mr. Leiter hadn't made it to the cafeteria. Lost your human? The SCA for this final tablet asked. No, I did not lose him. He forgot me in his room, so now I'm looking for him. Has it occurred to you that he may have left you on purpose? The SCA asked, its voice low and menacing. You're the second person to ask me that today. And what does that tell you? It responded, its lips curling to reveal a pointed smile.
Oh, God, not another one.
Mr. Pendergast shooed Bippy away, his hands moving through Bippy.
This one spies on me enough. Tell the doctors I don't need...
Bippy connected to the front desk's tablet and projected onto the desk. Michael was working, his eyes darting about, glazed over with his ocular OS. Made it to level 50 yet? Bippy asked, and Michael gasped. His eyes cleared and he clutched his chest. Jesus, Daniel! It's Bippy now. Bippy? What kind of name? Michael, listen. I don't want to cause you any alarm. But you can't find Mr. Leiter? That's the long and short of it. He left for breakfast, but he wasn't in the cafeteria just now. I've told him so many times if he just got the ocular surgery, he wouldn't have to worry about packing his tablet with him. But of course he doesn't listen to Bippy. I'm too old for that mess, he says.
Why get surgery when I've only had a few months?
I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but have you thought that maybe he left me on purpose? Is that what you're going to say? The hair on Bippy's back stood on end, and it barked. You jerks made me to take care of the old man, and that's what I intend to do. He could have fallen, or been kidnapped. Take it easy, bud. Look. Michael tapped the tablet and brought up the security camera feeds. He pointed to a rectangle, and it expanded. Mr. Leiter was sitting on a bench in the garden, reading a book. Well, Bippy said, feeling embarrassed. You could have told me that from the get-go. Now how will I get out to the garden? Can you take me? I don't think that's such a good idea. I think he wants his privacy. Either you can take me, or I can alert Dr. Poe that you've been playing Selves quest on the clock. Geez, all right, here. Michael tapped a few buttons on his phone, and Bippy was able to transfer to it. He placed his "Be Right Back" sign on the desk and walked to the garden. Surrounded by gardenia flowers, Mr. Leiter had his book spread over his lap. Excuse me, Mr. Leiter? Michael asked timidly.
Yes, Antrim?
Mr. Leiter smiled half-heartedly at Michael, blushing. You've got a, call? Someone wants to speak to you. He extended his phone, Bippy's pixelated face facing outward. Mr. Leiter sighed and patted the bench. Michael sat down, holding the phone out for both of them to see. Mr. Leiter, you had me worried sick. Did you even eat breakfast?
I didn't feel like it, Bippy.
Why'd you even call me that stupid name anyway, huh? Dumb old man. I'm here to make sure you're okay, and you go and leave me behind. You asshole!
Bippy,
Michael reprimanded. Mr. Leiter laughed creakily.
It seems I've rubbed off on you a little.
He scratched the stubble on his chin with his yellowing nails.
You sound so much like Daniel sometimes.
Bippy sighed. Mr. Leiter, I'm going to have to tell Dr. Poe your memory is slipping again. We clearly just discussed that I am Daniel, but you gave me a different name.
Not you, idiot. This Daniel.
Mr. Leiter held up the book, which upon closer inspection was a picture album. His crooked finger pointed to two young men, kissing in front of a river, snow falling around them. With a bit of imagination, Bippy could see one of them had been Mr. Leiter some long time ago, before the years had drawn his shoulders into a stoop and rinsed the color from his hair.
He always worried about me so much, like you do. Like a husband is supposed to, I guess. That's why I called you Daniel to begin with. But then it felt disrespectful.
His eyes returned to the photo, and he took a deep breath. You've never talked about him before, Bippy said quietly.
Because I didn't feel like it. That's my business.
Mr. Leiter turned the page, showing them more photos. Friends gathered around a table. Candid snapped while the other wasn't looking. They sat in silence, the plastic-covered pages and the buzzing of bees providing the only sound. The very last photo was of Mr. Leiter that Bippy knew, along with Daniel at this same river. Daniel's eyes were tired, his smile weak.
To be honest, I figured I'd be gone long before he was. But that worrying got to him, I think. He would fret and plan, and what did it get him? Dumbass died of a heart attack.
I'm sorry, Mr. Leiter, Michael said, placing a hand on the old man's shoulder. Don't be, Mr. Leiter said, and brusquely brushed a tear from his cheek.
We were both dumbasses. Didn't get around to having any kids to take care of us. He died, I fell. That's all she wrote.
Mr. Leiter, I apologize if my care is unsatisfactory, Bippy spoke from Michael's phone.
Shut up and help me take a piss,
Mr. Leiter said and grabbed his walker. Michael steadied him as he stood, walking with him towards the building. They entered his room, and Bippy returned to its terminal. Mr. Leiter placed the album tenderly on the nightstand beside Bippy's tablet and shuffled off to the restroom. You know, Mr. Leiter.
Jesus, let me take a piss.
If you'd like, we can scan the pictures from your album into my tablet. The originals would be safe, and you could look at them any time.
Yeah, and carry you around with me all the time? I see your game.
Mr. Leiter returned and sat on the edge of the bed.
I'll tell you like I told Daniel. Sometimes I'm going to need to be alone, and you've got to respect that. I know you care about me because that's how you were made, and the doctors want to keep an eye on me and make sure I get my meds. But I'm going to be fine.
Yes, Mr. Leiter, I understand.
I mean, until I'm not. I'll die, and then you'll get to be the bug up someone else's ass for a while.
If I have anything to say about it, that won't happen for a long time. Dumbass. Controller. The room smelled suspiciously of oranges. Not actual peel and eat oranges, but chemicals mixed together to give the impression of oranges. A cleaning product of some kind. They had used something similar in the train station. Better than the typical smells of ammonia or bleach, Iris thought to herself. Smells like that had always given her headaches. Not an allergy per se, but an aversion? She wasn't sure of the right word. She was spiraling a little. Sitting alone in a hospital gown had a way of doing that. What did they need to clean in this room that would smell worse than plastic oranges? There was a soft knock on the door before it swung open. "Thank you for waiting, Miss Birch." The bit-crushed voice of the robot seemed to bounce off the white walls of the room. Lacking a head, the robot's voice came from a speaker in its sleek black chest. It wheeled in a trolley littered with wires and metal. Did it feel like a butcher, pushing around a heap of what its insides were made of? Iris tried to wave the thought away in her mind, but the image of a trolley heaped with guts flashed and seemed to stay there for a moment too long. "What's all this?" Iris asked in a friendly way. She wasn't sure what all they were measuring, but she'd be embarrassed to lose the job based on how she treated the robot. But she was also just happy to have someone to talk to, even if that someone wasn't human. "This is the equipment we are currently testing. Please, lie down in a way that is most comfortable to you." Its arms whirred as motors sent rotors into action, gesturing at the paper-lined bed. Iris did as it asked, the paper crinkling as she first sat down, then lay down on her back. Her bruises ached as she did so, trying her best not to put too much pressure on her arm. The robot was standing over her now. A screen on its torso blinked on. "Please confirm your consent for this testing by placing your thumb on the screen. This waives all liability to Folsom Group and ensures you will be paid at the end of the session." A list of terms and conditions scrolled on the screen, an inviting green circle blinking at the bottom. Iris's hand lingered away from the screen for a moment. The robot did not seem in a rush, but it was hard to tell without a face. "If I decline the consent form?" "You are free to leave, Miss Birch. It is up to you to take part in this test." Iris nodded and placed her thumb on the screen. A check mark appeared briefly before the screen blinked off again. In a way that was surprisingly ginger to her, the robot placed a metal band across her forehead. A soft clamp went on her finger, to measure her heart rate, she assumed. Electrodes placed on various parts of her limbs. All of the wires led back to the robot. "I will be here if you need any assistance or if there are any complications." "Thank you," she said with her best smile. She had spent what felt like an eternity in the hospital, and here she was, back in a gown that let her ass hang out, strapped to a machine. But she had to pay those hospital bills somehow. "Please close your eyes and breathe steadily. You will likely experience some nausea or vertigo when the testing begins. This is expected." "Oh, okay. Thanks for the heads up." Iris tried her best to take slow, deliberate breaths. Her ribs protested. She closed her eyes. A flash of white filled her view, which startled her. The words, "Tester Online," scrolled across her field of vision. Her eyes moved downward, and she realized she had been staring at a fluorescent light. The vertigo the robot had warned of came suddenly, and she had to throw her arm out to stop herself from falling over. Her other hand reflexively went to her mouth. After a moment, she looked down to see that the arm that was supporting her against a nearby wall was not hers. She took her hand from her mouth and inspected it. Long, elegant fingers ended in painted nails. "Miss Birch?" The robot was in front of her. No, not the same robot. The same voice, but a different robot. This one was white and held an arm out to her. No wires. She was clothed again. "What's happening?" she asked, grabbing her head. What felt like a tightly wrapped bun had replaced the familiar stubble of her scalp. "The testing has begun, Miss Birch. Please, acclimate yourself to this test environment before moving on to the next." Its arm gently pulled away from her and indicated a door on the far wall. Beside it was a mirror. Her footsteps clacked as she stepped forward to the reflection. It grew larger, a stranger walking towards her. Smartly dressed, but not too professional. Taller than she was, the legs long and toned, ending in heels. "Did I steal someone's body?" she asked and turned to the robot. "I can assure you, you did not steal anyone's body. It is brand new. Please proceed to the next testing environment when you are ready, Miss Birch." Although she was far from ready, she straightened herself and looked at her reflection again. She poked her face, soft at first, but eventually mashing her finger into her cheek. Her whole body felt numb, like the time at the dentist's office when the Novocaine had seeped into her tongue and she kept worrying she would chew it in two. Still looking at her reflection, she reached over and grabbed the doorknob. She opened the door and stepped out to find herself on a subway platform. People bustled by, unbothered by a smartly dressed woman stepping out of a nondescript door in the tiled wall. A train screeched to a halt in front of her and the doors opened. The waiting passengers let the disembarking ones off and then surged forward. Iris barely felt it, but a nudge at her back moved her forward. An older woman was poking her with the end of her umbrella. "Get on the damn thing before it leaves us," she said. Iris stepped onto the train and grabbed a handrail. Was she supposed to get on a train? What if this wasn't the test environment they had intended? Before she could think about it any longer, the train emitted a soft chime and the doors hissed shut. The body lurched backwards a little as the train set out. Iris's thoughts began to calm. She had spent 8 hours a day, 5 days a week on a train. This may well have been home. Settling into old habits, she scanned the car's passengers, being as nonchalant as possible. This must be why Folsom had chosen her for the training. She wasn't sure how being a ticket controller would help with their current venture. But then again, she had no idea what their current venture was even setting out to do. She placed a hand inside her pocket and realized she had a phone this whole time. The screen came on to show a Department of Transportation badge, along with the app they had developed for issuing citations. It had her name, but the picture had changed to have this face. Did they want her to write citations? She couldn't be sure. The phone had no contacts, no messages. The train arrived at the next station while she was considering this. A few people filed out of the car and were replaced by a few more. Iris immediately noticed a woman who had looked up and down the car first. She had seen this look many times. If someone thought a controller was on board, they would hop out and go down a few cars or wait for the next one. The woman took a nearby seat and pulled out her phone. Iris found herself walking over as the chime sounded. They were moving again before she cleared her throat. The woman looked up from her phone and smiled. "Well, hey there." Iris had planned on presenting her badge and asking to see the woman's pass. The notion evaporated and she found herself at a loss for words. Hi." This body's voice was deeper than hers, a little raspy. "Got an interview or something?" she asked with a chuckle. "Something like that, yeah. I think, anyway." "Yeah, I've been there. Assholes make you get all dressed up for a meet and greet. Then they never call, like a bad date." Iris found herself laughing, but it was the laugh of this body. They talked for a few stops. Iris learned her name was Carla, and she had 2 cats. Her and her previous girlfriend had broken up a few months before. She worked as a bartender on weekends while she was going to school for programming. Iris wasn't sure if this was appropriate, but she began to tell Carla about her actual self. Moving to the city from some nowhere town. The semester off she took that turned into dropping out. Working for the Department of Transportation until the accident. Well, accident wasn't the right word. "This is me," Carla said, standing as the train began to pull into another station. She got a pen and wrote her number on the back of her seat from her purse. "Call me sometime. It's been nice chatting." Iris nodded and said she would. She watched as Carla stepped off the train and disappeared into the group of commuters. Would she be docked pay for having a personal conversation while she was supposed to be testing? She decided that was their fault. But then again, maybe there was something in those terms and conditions she accepted about protocols for failed tests. She didn't even ask if Carla had her pass. Didn't even do the basics of being a controller. The conductor came on the radio and in garbled static explained that after the stop, the next one would be the final one and all passengers must disembark. Iris felt that she needed to write at least one citation, prove she was cut out for the job. Less casually now, she watched the incoming passengers. Someone pushing a stroller, someone with a briefcase. The train chimed, and just as the doors were about to close, a man jumped into the car. She watched as he made an exaggerated whew. He looked at her and bared his teeth. Seeing his face, Iris immediately felt her heart race, her actual heart. The heart laying on the bed with the crinkly paper. She wasn't sure if this body even had a heart. Her bruises began to ache, and this body clutched at its ribs. "Hey, are you okay?" the man asked, moving towards her. She fumbled in her pocket and withdrew the phone. She showed the badge and breathlessly asked if he had his pass. This time, it would be different. "Are you serious, lady? Come on. There's only one more stop." "Show me your pass or get a citation. That's how this works." She was standing tall now, staring into his eyes. The last time this had happened, she had had to look up into them. Now they were on the level. She brought the phone between them, and it took a picture of his face. It scanned the picture and found his profile, adding a new item to the already long list. She saw her name among the items scrolling by. He made to snatch the phone from her hand, and she grabbed his wrist. He tried to wrench it free, but her fingers were closed tightly around it. Her arm didn't budge. Fine, whatever. Give me the ticket and piss off. At that moment, she realized how effortless it was to hold him in place. He huffed, as if to say what a hassle. She didn't realize how strong he was. Seriously, back off. Are you scared? She asked. This caught him off guard, his face going slack. The other passengers were watching now. There was a good chance one of them was recording this. Do you remember the name Iris Birch? She asked. Let go of me, you crazy bitch. He was struggling a little more intently now, but she still had him by the wrist. She placed the phone back in her pocket. Answer the question, please. Do you remember the name Iris Birch? No, okay? I have no idea who you're... His voice became as garbled as the conductor's announcement. Her other hand was closing around his neck. It didn't feel hard and solid like the handrails. It was soft and giving under the pressure of her thumb against his windpipe. The other passengers began to intervene. They pulled on him, pulled on her, but she did not loose her grip. You beat her! She shouted. His hand became a fist, hitting her. His legs thrashed against her as she lifted him into the air. But this body was not rattled by fists and feet. She twisted his wrist and felt the bones strain and grind against hers. You left her bleeding on the sidewalk. You could have killed her. His face was ugly and red as he strained. You're killing him! A person with the stroller had taken the child out and faced them away from the scene. Good, she said. She squeezed his throat as hard as she could, but found that the hand did not obey her. Tester disconnected. The letters appeared in bold red font across her eyes. The body's hands went slack, and he fell to the floor of the train car. People rushed to his aid, pouring over him. No! She screamed. Let me kill that piece of shit! It was now her voice she heard reverberating off the white walls of the room. Her voice came in shuddering waves. She blinked and found herself looking up at the headless robot. Her hands were tightly clenched, her fingernails dug into her palms. The aches of her bruises and mending bones came rushing back. She was assaulted by the astringent orange smell. Thank you for your time, Miss Birch. The test has been completed. She sat up a little too quickly, some of the wires and electrodes peeling painfully off her skin. Did you know that was going to happen? What was I testing for? She was shouting at the robot as it tried to delicately remove the equipment from her. She tore it off herself and threw it onto the bed in a heap. You will find your clothes and personal effects on the table nearby. Please dress and stop by the front desk for your compensation. You will receive correspondence if you are selected to test with us again. The robot placed the mechanical guts on the cart again and pushed it away. It opened and closed the door quietly. Iris stepped off the bed and found it hard to walk to the table with her clothes. She was still expecting to be taller, to have the other body's longer legs. Leaving the gown in a heap on the floor, she dressed as quickly as she could. Could she remember Carla's number? Would Carla even want to talk to the her that now shivered so pitifully with indignant rage? If she hurried, could she find the train they were on? Could she finish the job? She stepped out of the room in a flurry of movement, hoisting her purse onto her shoulder. People walked past without giving her a glance. Employees with lanyards that ended in plastic badges. Excuse me, miss. A man with a cart of cleaning supplies approached her and pointed to the door. She stepped aside. He retrieved his badge from the cart and tapped it to the door handle. It clicked and he opened the door, placing his badge back on the cart. He began to enter the room when she slipped in. I'm so sorry, I forgot something. Oh, no problem. He smiled and got a spray bottle. The stench of oranges filled the air anew as he removed the paper from the bed and wiped down the vinyl. She jingled her keys and held them up. Got 'em. Thank you, sir. Have a good day, he said, and waved at her with his rag hand. He turned his back to her to finish wiping. The badge clinked slightly as she lifted it up and stuffed it into her bag quickly. She did not look back to see if he heard it. The front desk clerk presented a code that Iris scanned with her phone, credits going directly into her bank account. She didn't even look to see how much. Trying to steady her breath, she said, Do you know if they'll be doing any more tests soon? I'm sorry, I'm not sure. But they have your contact information, if so. The clerk returned to their work, but Iris wasn't sure of how to proceed. Did you like it? They asked quietly, leaning forward a bit. Maybe a little too much, Iris said and laughed nervously. Don't worry, that's what they're banking on. If I hear of another test group, I'll be sure to put your name on there. They winked and gestured to the front door. Iris thanked them and turned away. She nervously touched the badge in her bag, just to be sure it was still there. She tried not to hurry in a suspicious way, but found herself almost jogging to her car. Falling into the driver's seat, she immediately pulled down the visor. The tiny mirror reflected her once familiar face, eyes staring back at her. She saw an intensity there that had not been there before. Iris thought of all the could-dos and be's. They all felt like bad ideas. However, she knew she was going to do one, if not all of them. It was just a matter of deciding which came first.
The Body Electric. On tonight's finale of The Body Electric, the host said as he smiled with his 2 white teeth, his eyes not smiling along. We see if love truly knows no bounds. Last week, we saw the tear-filled departure of fan favorites Emily and John. Chuck watched himself on the screen, hugging and kissing each of them on the cheek. He watched himself watching them close the front door of the communal house behind them. A soft zoom showed a tear leave his eye, and he dragged the back of his hand across his cheek. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Bailey asked. She squeezed his shoulder. Every Wednesday for the last month and a half, she had come over, made dinner, and watched the show with him. Their rapidly crusting soup bowls were piled on the coffee table, the only barrier between the couch and the screen. They were bathed in its blue-white flashes, the rest of his tiny apartment black and barren. "I'm sure." Chuck managed a meager smile. After this episode, there would be a few more weeks of gossip columns and tabloid articles, and then he would fade back into sweet obscurity. He had to see for himself what everyone else was going to see of him. Over the last several weeks, the world, his family, his exes, his grade school teachers had seen a group of 12 people vie for Chuck's affection. They had watched grainy night vision footage of hot tub rendezvous and violin swell sunset picnics. "We really thought we had it in the bag," one of Emily's managers told the camera. "We were scared for the first few weeks, but the touch embargo really helped us iron out Emily's kinks," he said, very proud of his genius wordplay. The Chuck that existed on screen now was happy for the touch embargo. He thought it was interesting and tasteful that the showrunners had made him and the contestants wait before they could kiss or hold hands. It meant they really had to get to know each other. At least, that's what he had assumed. One of John's managers had her turn to speak. "Honestly, I'm just happy we made it this far. When John walked through the glass door, we thought we were goners." A quick clip showed a house party from one of the cameras placed high near the ceiling. It showed John walking happily, beer in hand, towards the balcony where Chuck was sitting. His back was to the door at the time, so he didn't see it happen, but in the footage it's apparent John walked straight through the glass in the door, shattering it. Chuck had jumped up to help, but the showrunners had EMTs on hand at all times. Now Chuck knew the EMT that barked at him to step back was the manager that was now talking. "I thought for sure he'd notice, how John was totally unfazed, but pff," she said and blew a raspberry. "It just got us more brownie points." Chuck couldn't stop babying him for the next few weeks. A compilation showed Chuck bringing soup to a bandaged John, a vignette where John thanked him for doting on him. They had shared their first kiss then. Chuck remembered John's stubble on his neck as he buried his face and laughed, embarrassed. "But," the manager said and shrugged, "it just wasn't meant to be. We played a good game, but Tyler and Riley's teams were just better. No shame in that. We'll get them next time." She winked at the camera and it returned to the host. "If you're just joining us, don't worry. You haven't missed the big moment. Stay tuned for the heart-wrenching, a very brief glimpse of Chuck, his face contorted and crying, the sizzling, a flash of Chuck and Riley embracing, and the climactic, a shot of Tyler's hand on Chuck's cheek, season finale, will return after this short sponsor break." An ad for Stoplight came on, and Bailey took the opportunity to clear the dishes. Chuck had tried the dating app for a brief time after the show. He had a few mildly successful dates, but then the show began to air and he had to uninstall it. He had to deactivate all of his social media accounts, for that matter, when the memes began. Had to move across town, had to change his phone number. With the weight he had lost, it was almost like he was an entirely different person. Bailey brought him a mug of coffee. "You doing okay? Just say the word and we can turn it off." "Yeah," he said, and took a sip of the still too hot coffee. Every minute is a minute closer to it being over and done with. "Damn Skippy," she said, and clinked her coffee mug against his. "Welcome back and strap in for our season recap." The host turned to a different camera. When Chuck first arrived, he was single and ready to mingle. "I'm really hopeful," the then Chuck said. "I mean, it's not exactly normal to have 12 strangers all trying to date you at the same time, but hey, why not? You only live once, right?" The host ran through the original 12 contestants and their teams. Each had a brief introduction from the lead manager. They said things like, "Judging by Chuck's social media, he's a fun-loving guy. We're going to focus on that and make Bianca a blast. And we're running for an aggressive strategy. Not pushy, of course, but Roya's going to charm his pants off." Chuck watched as he entered the house for the first time. His hello was met with silence. Another camera showed the managers fretting over their 12 contestants, adjusting strands of hair and touching up makeup as a timer counted down. The contestants' arms were posed, their heads tilted, observed, then tilted back. When the timer hit 0, they scrambled out of the living room just as Chuck was entering the front door. All 12 of them sat, frozen in place. some smiling at one another, their hands poised mid-gesture. Chuck's voice rang out a second time, and the 12 of them animated simultaneously. "We're in here," Emily had yelled out to him. He entered the room sheepishly, and they all clapped for him. When Chuck watched the first few episodes, this pausing and unpausing was so surreal. Every time he fell asleep or left a room, whoever was in it just ceased to be. They sometimes moved to their own bedrooms where their managers were waiting to make tweaks and address the camera. The host went through the first few weeks' worth of challenges and eliminations. The show cut to one of Riley's managers. "We knew we had a real shot week 3 during the touch embargo scandal. We were freaking out. Everyone was freaking out. Luckily, we had started working on Riley's reactions literally the night before. The third week was the last week of the touch embargo. However, Chuck had felt such an attraction to them. They were obviously intelligent, if not a bit arrogant at times, but he found their confidence so appealing. The physical attraction was hard to deny for Chuck, certainly, but he liked to think it was more than that." Chuck relived the moment in his memory and on the screen. Riley had taken Chuck to a scary movie. He had screamed and grabbed their arm at such a laughably obvious jump scare. "Oh, sorry," Chuck whispered in their ear, realizing he had broken the touch embargo. "I don't mind," Riley had whispered back. Chuck could remember their breath on his ear, how it made tingles go down the back of his neck. "Would you mind if I kissed you?" Chuck asked as the credits to the movie rolled. In the now, Chuck covered his mouth in shame. "Not at all," Riley said. They moved towards one another, touching their lips briefly. It wasn't a Hays Code mashing of mouths or a panting porno kiss. It was a first kiss of two people who genuinely liked each other. The camera cut to another of Roy's managers. She was obviously aggravated. "What total bullshit. That is totally cheating. None of the rest of us got a chance for a kiss before week 4. No wonder they're one of the finalists." Nothing was ever said to Chuck about the kiss, but he did honor the touch embargo for the rest of the week. Roy had attempted to make a move on him at their date the day after. Apparently his team had forgotten their promise to avoid pushiness. He had grabbed Chuck and pulled him in, Harlequin romance style. Chuck had placed his hand on Roy's chest and gently pulled away, but Roy did not like that. Chuck made his decision for elimination that week early and made him go home. The next few minutes briefly touched on the other eliminations, but focused mainly on Chuck and Tyler's interactions through those weeks. Tyler was the oldest contestant, but not much older than Chuck. He had started to go salt and pepper, which Chuck liked. They showed several of their conversations. "Do you want to have kids?" Tyler asked him over a candlelit dinner. "I think so. I'm not sure. What about you?" "I would like to. I'm at that point in life where I've had lots of great experiences and I'm ready to share new experiences with someone. And one of those is to have a family." "Are you sure a dating show is the right place to find someone like that?" Chuck said and laughed. "As long as you're on it, I think I'm in the right place," Tyler had said and winked. Cut to one of Tyler's managers. Holy crap, dude. That wink was not even on purpose. One of Tyler's eyes had a glitch that we just couldn't iron out, and we were praying it didn't go off. But it did, and it totally paid off. We got a lot of flack for making Tyler old, but it was so apparent Chuck had some daddy issues. Chuck's cheeks burned red, on the screen out of bashfulness, and in real life out of embarrassment. "Oh, fuck him," Bailey said, and rubbed Chuck's arm. And finally, here we are, the last few moments of Body Electric. Stick around after the show for our wrap-up discussion. Our online poll is officially closed as of right, he said and pointed to his watch. Now, if you voted for the right contestant tonight, you'll get the chance to win some fabulous prizes. Enjoy. The screen faded to black. When the color returned, the pixels in the screen had taken the shape of Chuck, Riley, and Tyler. They were sitting somberly on the fashionable sofas in the living room. "No matter what happens," Chuck said, his head in his hands, "I care very deeply for the both of you. Thank you for the last few weeks, and please stay in touch." Riley and Tyler agreed. Since he was not looking at them, their expressions were blank, bodies still. The host knocked on the door, and first Chuck, then the other two turned to look at it. "It's time for your final decision." Chuck smiled weakly, and they all filed out onto the balcony. "Tyler, you are such a great person. I can absolutely see a future with you, starting that family we talked about," Chuck said with a sad smile. "And Riley, you are just such a beautiful individual, inside and out. You have a spark and a drive that is so admirable. But, unfortunately, they won't let us all just run away and get married to each other," he said, and they all awkwardly laughed together. The music pounded like a dying heart, the camera flashing back and forth between the three of them. Silence fell and the cameras lingered on Chuck's face, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Riley, I would like you to be with me." Riley's team poured out of the house, screaming victoriously. Chuck wiped his face with his sleeve, confused. Riley and Tyler both stared ahead vacantly. Did we stop filming? Chuck asked hesitantly, looking at the cameras. He had thought there were some of the production assistants who maybe just really wanted Riley to win. The host stepped up beside Chuck and placed his hand on his shoulder. Chuck, thank you for being a part of our project. He gestured to the front yard, and Chuck looked down to find the other 10 contestants and their team standing on the lawn, looking up at him. For the last 6 weeks, you have been the control for a groundbreaking experiment. Each of the 12 people you've met while here on the show have been androids created by different teams from around the globe. They have been competing for your affection and attention, but also testing the boundaries of what is capable for robots and programming. Not only has each of them passed the Turing test 1,000 times over, but one in particular has proven they can elicit feelings of love. And that is truly amazing. What? Chuck said pitifully, and the camera cut away to the host again, explaining to stay tuned for an interview with Riley's team. They had continued filming, but Chuck understood why they didn't show the rest. It took him several more minutes to truly grasp what the host was telling him, and then he had gone on a tirade. He shook Riley by the shoulders, begging them to say something. He had shoved the host. He grappled with one of the members of Riley's team. Despite all of that, they had deposited several thousand credits into his account the instant he had made his decision. Hush money. Not that they had to give him that. He had signed all the papers without reading much of any of them. At the time, he was told the show didn't have a title yet, but no one knew that. They thought he was such an idiot to not know he was in a house full of robots on a show called Body Electric. He wasn't sure what would have happened if he had wised up to the project any earlier. Maybe he would have won more money. He was sure they had some contingency plan. Initially, he was going to go public, but he had needed their money not much longer after the show stopped filming. He was hoping it would be enough to last until the next big show came on and they stopped putting his face on magazines. Bailey turned the TV off and got up to turn on a light. There. It's done. How do you feel? Chuck stared at the black screen, seeing himself in its surface, unlike how he had seen himself on the television for the last several weeks. I'm not sure I feel anything at all, Chuck said quietly.
Selves quest. Sylvia's feet ached. They throbbed as she pulled her non-slip shoes from her feet, the pain pulsing with her heart. She smelled. Sweat and spilled sangria soaked through her shirt. She checked her account and saw that she had made a decent amount of tips for a Wednesday, but not great for working a double. Definitely not enough to make the walking cologne cloud's advances worth it while their wives slapped their fingers for more. They reminded her of a baby bird, screeching until it got whatever it was they wanted. The best is when they called her Sir before asking for their 5th glass of sherry. A shower would be the best idea, but she couldn't muster her muscles to move. Then there was the standing, and the trying not to look in the mirror while the water warmed up. She decided instead to boot up Selves Quest. Playing for a bit might take her mind off things. Maybe it would make the shower more bearable. She wondered why she was making excuses for herself to herself. The tones played from her phone, and she reclined in her desk chair, which creaked in protest. Soon she was walking forward in a dark expanse. The pain coursing up her legs was gone as each step brought her closer and closer to an archway of light. Her character's body materialized from head to toe. She flexed her fingers and ran them through her silver hair. As she got closer, she could see the silhouettes of people walking by, the sun shining directly onto cobblestone streets. Now entering Silbar Harbor, read a dialogue box, the ellipses disappearing and reappearing as the connection was finished. She stepped out onto the busy street and took a deep breath. Taking a moment, she watched the busy bustling of the other players. Knights and wizards walked together, devising strategies. A bard busked on a nearby corner, placing buffs on anyone who gave him some gold. A fight broke out in a nearby guild house, and it poured out onto the street. She smiled and walked towards the city center. The buildings of the city sagged at their bases and leaned precariously towards each other as if in conversation. She had never been, but she heard that the old cities in Europe had similar buildings and cobblestone streets, mazes of back alleys with shops tucked into each corner. She had saved up enough in-game money to buy herself one such shop. Approaching it, she dragged her hand along the door and it unlocked, swinging open. Scrawling script in the windows changed from, "Sorry, we're closed," to, "We're open." She walked behind the counter and into the small kitchen. She equipped her favorite apron, pink fabric with green gelatinous cubes dotting it. Pulling up her cooking skill tab, she selected a few baked goods and her hands set to the task, mixing eggs, flour, and fantastic ingredients like glow fungus and manticore mane. They would be incredibly gross in real life. She knew, much like her own attempts in baking, but in this world, they were perfect. You couldn't taste anything, but her high cooking skill meant they healed for quite a bit, or might bestow some other boon like faster cooldowns. She had read a rumor somewhere that the Selves developers were working on incorporating scent and taste. Sylvia hoped that if they did, they didn't include how a city like this would actually smell. She got enough of that outside the game. She closed her eyes and felt her hands moving on their own, whisking the batter together. They did not fumble like her real fingers. The bell above the door chimed as a player entered. Sylvia guessed she was a witch based on her pointed hat and star-strewn frock. She tapped her staff against the wooden floor as she perused the pastry case. "Those aren't all that fresh, so I sell 'em cheap," Sylvia called out from her kitchen. The witch was visibly startled. "Oh, you're a real person," she said, laughing. "I thought this was an NPC shop, open this late. Well, assuming it's late where you are." Sylvia placed pans into the oven and walked to the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yeah, it is, but I worked late and needed to get away for a bit." "So you got off work to come into a fantasy world to go back to work?" the witch asked with a smile. "Yeah, I guess that's true," Sylvia said with a small chuckle, pulling the old pastries from the case. "But this isn't work for me. I like making things to help other people." "That's sweet. I guess as long as you don't work at a bakery in the real world, you're not being too redundant." The witch stowed her staff in her inventory and inspected the muffins, turnovers, and cakes. "I wish. I don't think they'd allow me within a mile of a real bakery, though. I've had to take the batteries out of my fire alarm too many times to count." "That's okay. You just need some practice." She selected a piece of mandrake torte and held it up. "How much?" Just take it," Sylvia said and shrugged. "I doubt I'll get much business tonight, and I'll end up just throwing them away anyway." "Well, thank you." She ate the cake in one bite, a light blue shimmer radiating across her skin. "That should do the trick. I've been trying to solo that goblin camp in Oak Grove." "I wouldn't know much about that. I've never done much of the questing outside the towns and cities, just enough to get some gold to get ingredients." "Oh, neat. I didn't know you could play this as a pacifist." I don't know if I'd call myself that exactly," Sylvia said. "So Selves Quest is just like a bakery simulator for you. That's so cool." The witch leaned against the case, apparently not in a hurry. "So after you practice some out there, you could save up some money, get your own bakery. I'd come to it." "I wish it were that easy. I can't take a box from one guy to another guy and collect snapdragons to sell on the marketplace in the real world, and not make enough money to buy a business anyway." "Well, if you think about it, courier services do just that, and florists." Sylvia felt a twinge of agitation. Her mother had told her mind over matter since she was a kid, and she'd grown to resent it as an adult. No matter how bad you want something, that doesn't just make it happen. Sometimes all the positivity and hard work you can manage won't change your body or your life the way you want it to. She didn't want to get into an argument with a stranger about how a 4-year degree in lifelong debt landed her a job serving tables at catered events. The same job she had when she started working for that degree 8 years prior. She realized that she'd gone quiet, staring at the witch, who was looking back at her with a tilted head. "Well, I'd better be getting back to the ovens. I'd hate them to burn down my building." She was unsure if the game even allowed for that to happen, but she genuinely hoped it didn't. Sylvia gestured to the pastries sitting on top of the case. "Feel free to take any and all of these." The witch picked them up, and they disappeared into her inventory. "You're the best. My name's Rora, by the way." Caston, Sylvia said, almost forgetting her character's name. "Nice to meet you, Rora. Feel free to stop by any time. Tell your friends, all that good stuff." "Hang in there, okay?" Rora's smile was small and mostly sad. "I can tell you're having a hard time, but don't give up." "What's that supposed to mean?" "I can hear it in your voice. You're tired in more ways than one, maybe all the ways that a person can be tired." Rora waited, but Sylvia was unsure of how to respond. "But you want to make things to help people, and you've done just that. I'm going to go blow up some goblins, and that's all thanks to you and your cakes." "You're welcome. Good luck out there." And with that, Sylvia returned to the kitchen. She waited until the bell above the door jingled again before she went back to the front of the store. Resting her elbows on the case, she laid her head against its surface, feeling the cold glass on her cheek. The thought of burning the bakery down ran through her mind again. She was so stupid to have wasted all this time on a bakery simulator. It had taken hours of fetch quests and haggling at the market to get the building, and even more hours to hone her cooking skill to the point that she could make things that other people would actually want to buy. She could have applied all of that time to baking in the real world. She could have gone to culinary school. But no, she thought, that would require actual money. Money that she wouldn't be spending on rent or bills. She sighed heavily. Leave it to her to make a fun escape from reality game into another place to fret about bottom lines. Hey, you got food or what? A paladin in full plate armor asked from the doorway. Sylvia hadn't heard the bell ring when she entered. Almost. My fresh stuff should be done any moment. Just sold out of my day-olds. Be right back. She went back to the ovens and pulled the baked goods out. She felt the warmth of the pans through her gloves, and she smiled, savoring the heat. Placing the trays in the cases, she waved her hand over them and said, Voila! The paladin poked at the glass, assumedly trying to make up her mind. Got anything to prevent poison? Going down into the city sewers later. Oh yeah, the Manticore main macarons will have you covered. The paladin paid for a few and turned to leave. Rora said to come, in case you've got like a referral program going. Oh, well, tell her I said thank you. The paladin was quickly replaced by a couple of warlocks, and then a cleric, and then another paladin. Soon her tiny shop was filled with customers. A line formed outside the door. Each of them had come at the suggestion of Rora, or by proxy. Before she knew it, she'd sold out and was whipping up as many items as she could. For a moment, she stood and listened to the clamor of the customers. They were laughing, arguing, singing. This was the busiest her shop had ever been, so full of life in a way that made her want to weep. They were complimenting her goods and how it must have taken a lot of dedication to put her store together. For the first time in a long time, she felt accomplished. Eventually, the line dwindled and the customers came fewer and farther between. She decided it was a good time to close up shop. Pulling the door closed behind her, she ran her hand along it once more, and the script faded back to the apologetic message. She found that she was tired in a way that was very fulfilling. Had a good turnout, it seems, Rora said from a doorway across the street. It was. Thank you so much. Everyone said you told them to come by. I didn't think you'd actually do it. Of course I did. Rora walked across and extended her hand, which Sylvia took. It's the least I could do. Why is that the least you could do? I think the literal least you could do would be to forget we ever had even spoke. Well, duh. You're a good person, Caston. Good people don't get everything they deserve, and if I can make it happen, I'm going to. Rora opened her arms and Sylvia gave her a hug. Now, just imagine doing that in the real world. I know you can't just snap your fingers and make it happen, but I believe in you, and I'm willing to bet a lot of other people do too. Thank you. I think that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Well, get used to it. You'll have reviews and critics saying nice things about you all the time. Now, go make it happen, and keep in touch. I want you to fill me in as often as you can. The two of them exchanged email addresses and parted ways. Sylvia returned to the entrance exit to the game. She stepped through the doorway into the darkness. Caston's body unraveled beneath her, and soon she was opening her eyes, greeted by the pain in her feet once more. Her phone buzzed, an email from Rora. Stay beautiful, it read, followed by a link. In it, she found an article for a gaming website. The author, writing under the game name Rora, had an ongoing segment about the site called Selves Sundries. In it, she highlighted people and places she stumbled upon. This one was about Sylvia's shop. She outlined how Sylvia aspired to be a baker in real life, and Selves Quest was helping her realize that dream until she could make it a reality. In the ending, she urged her readers to visit the shop whenever they were in the city of Silbar Harbor. Caston, the Baker Supreme, wrote Rora, is one of the kindest people you could ever hope to meet. With the determination and creativity she has made apparent in making the game her own, I can only imagine what she's capable of. Sylvia began to cry. A complete stranger could see the worth that she could not ascribe herself. She still doubted the plausibility of her own bakery, but for the rest of the night, in the shower and laying in bed before drifting off to sleep, she imagined naming a pastry after Rora, the Good Witch.
The bubble. We're outside the bubble, moving closer, looking in. A curtain of frightened fish part, sunlight gleaming off their scales. Underwater forests of coral teem with life, their orange branches growing so subtly. Anemone, bright and alluring, protect a clownfish with their poisonous pink tendrils. The sand is dark here, littered with gleaming white rocks. We admire its beauty, a land of sustained sunset. Through a porthole in the blue bubble, we see our subject, Adam LaFoe. He has not bothered getting dressed today. Notice his limbs long and languid. He barely opens his eyes. Perhaps he is not sleeping well. His steps shuffle to the porthole as he looks out at the sea, sighing. We travel through the porthole and look over his shoulder, seeing what he sees. The fluorescent lights of the interior strip away the color of the outside world. Our scene of sunset looks much more like a gray dawn. Within the structure we hear a drip. Adam does not seem to notice it as he sits down at his station, running a hand through his greasy hair. It has been several days since our subject has bathed, it would seem. Adam LaFoe? He speaks into the console, his voice hoarse from disuse. A display appears and he sets about his usual duties. He performs diagnostics on the bubble systems, ensuring his survival. He surveys the surrounding wildlife, tracking their behaviors. We leave him to his work for now. Traveling through the steel interior, we see his modest habitat. The spherical structure is divided into chambers, like a heart. His bed occupies one, his workplace another. In one we see a collection of books and magazines, a television. We pass the tiny lavatory and land in the kitchen. The sink is currently full, or as full as it can be, with a single cup, plate, fork, and knife. Adam appears in the door. He retrieves his cup and places it under the single-serve coffee maker. It hisses and dispenses a steam of steaming coffee. He carries it back to his station and we follow closely. He stops at the entertainment room, but does not turn on the light, does not enter. Perhaps he is remembering a time when he whiled away his hours here. Perhaps he has noticed the dripping. He goes back to his workstation. Incoming call. A voice, soothing and soft, says from his station. Adam scrambles, putting on a shirt and shorts. The screen displays the image of an older man up on the surface. Mr. LaFoe? The man asks, and Adam slams down in his seat. Yes, Mr. Lyra. Sorry, I was getting some coffee. He holds up his mug as if for evidence. It is apparent by the sweat forming on Adam's brow that he is intimidated by the older man, as those who are under someone else's authority often are. Very good. I was calling for your weekly progress report. I will cut to the chase, Adam. It seems some of your recent reports are lacking in their usual quality. Would you care to explain? Adam swallows, buying time with a sip of coffee. It can be observed in many species that a dominant member of the herd will flex and display, requiring acts of fealty from the weaker members. Sir, I was actually meaning to talk to you about that. We see here that he has decided to challenge his superior. To be frank, if I may, you may. Lyra seems almost amused. To be frank, sir, I'm not cut out for this job, I think. Adam is searching for the right words as his roving eyes demonstrate. I'm having a really hard time with being alone down here. I wanted to ask for help before I just quit, sir. Tears have formed in Adam's eyes. Not a challenge after all, we see. But how will such a call for help be answered? Mr. LaFoe, you are aware of your labor contract. At the end of your contracted term, another representative will arrive to replace you. From there, you are free to do as you please, because I can assure you it will not be a position at the Folsom Group. Sir, I'm sorry, I didn't mean... Quit being a pussy, LaFoe. Cry, jack off, do whatever you gotta do, but we are not going to waste the resources on a non-emergency evacuation. Unless you're bleeding to death, we are not risking an emergency evacuation, he said, his voice climbing in volume. And even then, we would have to take costs into consideration. How selfish can you be? If you so much as think about fucking this up, I will have you in court until the day you die. Adam nods quietly. In the silence after Mr. Lyra's explosion, he finally hears the dripping. He turns his head to the direction of its source. Now get back to work, Mr. Lyra says as his face disappears from the screen. Adam wipes a tear from his eye and stands. He is still listening for the drip. A drip could be dangerous, he knew. At this depth, a drip could become a breach, and a breach would mean certain death. We can see him considering his options. If he were to leave, taking the scuba gear near the hatch, he could ascend to the surface. But if he did so too quickly, the gases in his body would release bubbles that could paralyze him, or worse, kill him. He shrugs off the thought as the soft voice says once more, "Incoming call." Huffing, he returns to the console. We see a picture of a young man, handsome and happy, the name Arthur appearing below it. Adam's finger hovers over the answer button, considering. He takes a moment to wipe his eyes and comb his hair with his fingers. He presses the answer button, and the screen shows Arthur, his face bright and surrounded by darkness. "Hey, babe," Arthur says, smiling. We observe Adam smiling as well, but not in the same way. "You okay?" Arthur asks. Yeah, still trying to wake up. Got the boss breathing down my neck about these reports. I know this is a recorded line or whatever, but I'll say it. Fuck him." Adam behaves as if he did not hear what Arthur said. "How about you?" "Set my alarm to wake up and talk to this cute guy I know." "Oh, really?" "Yeah, he's real tall and smart. He's under the ocean at the moment, though. A real Little Mermaid situation." Adam's laugh is small but genuine. "Am I the Little Mermaid in this scenario?" Obviously. Trapped underwater by a grumpy old man father type, yearning for your true love up on dry land. A notification appears on the display, reminding Adam that personal calls should not be taken during work hours. His smile fades quickly and he alerts Arthur to the notification. "Okay, fine. I love you." "You too." Adam moves to disconnect the call. "But hey, for real." Arthur's face is now etched with concern. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for asking." "It's okay if you're not, you know. You're cooped up in there by yourself. I would have burned the place down by now." "I mean, it's underwater, so I don't know how successful a fire would be." "Oh, whatever. You know what I mean. Work hours or no, call me if you need me." "Will do. Love you." Adam disconnects the call, and after Arthur's face is gone, he places his head in his hands. Altruism, as it is called in nature, is when a member of a species acts for the well-being of another despite their own interests. It is unclear if Adam's avoidance of telling his mate about his situation is altruism or self-preservation. These things can be unclear in the wild. Adam returns to his work, entering data and compiling it elsewhere. Time moves slowly for our subject, and his mind wanders. Compiling a new report, he sends it to Mr. Lyra. "Please see attached my most recent report completed today. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns," he types. "Hopefully it is up to your standards. But thanks again," deleting it. He is thinking of his long-term survival, as any prey animal must. Although he is struggling, losing this job would mean not being able to feed his family. He could develop a backup plan, but he fears looking for a job on his Folsom Group workstation will only ensure the doomed fate of his career. In the stillness of the bubble, he hears the dripping once more. It is faster now, more urgent. For a brief moment, it sounds as if someone is tapping on the glass of the porthole. He looks to be sure, even as impossible as that would be. We watch as the subject feeds on MREs. Although we can see his reluctance and lack of hunger at the way he pokes the food with his fork, he must eat all of it. Waste is a hazardous thing in the bubble. As he finishes, he resolves to read for the evening. We know that reading is very therapeutic and relaxing. He turns on the light to the entertainment room and pauses. We peer over his shoulder to see a puddle on the floor reflecting the fluorescent lights. The source of the dripping is now evident as large, swollen drops of seawater fall from the ceiling. Adam steps through the puddle to the bookshelf, reaching out. The books are bloated like corpses. The magazines have melted into one another. He grabs a handful of the books and takes them to the kitchen, spreading their pages out under the bulb that hangs over the table. "Please, please, please," he whispers, trying to be ginger with their translucent innards. Despite his efforts, a page tears out in his hand, black bleeding out. It is then that we see Adam truly cry. He sits at the table and lets out some mournful moans. He cannot do it, he thinks. He can't keep living this way. His one solace was now laid out in front of him, wavy pages staring up at him. If he had done something about the dripping earlier, maybe this wouldn't have happened, we know. He knows. In this moment, he wishes the bubble would burst, that the drip would become a flood and he could be done with it. However, he knows he does not truly wish this. He stands and finds a cabinet with some sealant. He does his best to patch the seam where the drips are coming from. With any luck, it will hold until his relief arrives. He returns to his workstation. He pens another message. "Leak detected in Chamber 3. Attempt to repair. Damage minimal." He writes, although the damage feels far from minimal. He turns off the lights in the chambers and lays on his bed. We can barely see him in the dark, turned away from the door. It is several hours later when he finally falls asleep. We are treated to a vision of his mind's eye, watching his dreams along with him. He is a zombie, shuffling about the bubble. He searches each chamber dutifully, dragging his dead legs. With no one to eat, he resorts to devouring himself. His knuckles and teeth crack against one another as he bites into bloody fingers. He feels the pain, but also the urge to eat in equal measure. Mr. Lyra watches from his workstation, eating popcorn and laughing. What an idiot, Mr. Lyra is saying, laughing and pointing. Adam consumes until there is nothing left. His eyes open to the sound of his alarm. Another day has come and his duties must be fulfilled. Yet he lays there. Incoming call. The soft voice can clearly be heard from his room, but he does not stir. Adam? Mr. Lyra's voice fills the small space. Adam, where the fuck are you? Adam blinks slowly. He draws the covers over his face, and we are there with him in the cocoon it forms. What could he really do to Adam, he thinks. If he's fired, they will have to send someone. If the drip becomes a leak, becomes a breach, they will have to send someone. If the breach destroys the bubble, Adam won't have to worry about any of it. We crawl out from beneath the covers and tour the bubble once more. The kitchen contains the books, approaching dry but still soggy. His workstation display contains the enraged face of Mr. Lyra, who is pointing with one hand and pounding his desk with the other. In the entertainment room, we see the sealant has not achieved its goal. The puddle in the floor grows incrementally with each drop. As we depart, we see one last image of Adam staring out of his door frame through the porthole. From where he lays, he can see nothing but the deep, dark water. We leave him here like this. Maybe the leak is inevitable. We cannot be sure.
Foondumped. Nestled inside a remodeled A-frame home, the Foondumped gave the impression that it was a seedling of a larger house somewhere, blown in by the breeze. Almost as if you were only patient enough, you could return in 50 years to find a marvelous mansion. From across the street, Patience watched the front of the house, which looked deserted. The sun of midsummer was beating her into the ground, causing her bare shoulders to tighten. She hoped her hat and sunglasses might lend itself to a disguise, like she'd seen in the movies. Dark frames and broad brims were all anyone needed, it seemed. She fished a cigarette out of her handbag and lit it with a match. "Ma'am?" A man in a white coat had appeared beside her most suddenly. She started a little, clutching her purse to her side. He laughed, raising his hands. "I'm sorry, but I think you're my 3 o'clock. Miss Paul? Dr. Moonin." He extended his hand, and she took it, placing the cigarette in the corner of her mouth. "I was just returning from a late lunch." "Does that happen often? Late lunches, I mean." "Yes, more often than not. But that's okay. I eat big breakfasts." Dr. Moonin patted himself on the belly, which was pushing against the inside of his coat. "Here, let's get out of this god-awful sun." He gestured, and they walked across the street and into the building. A fleet of fans was trying its damnedest to keep the interior cool. He pointed to a chair in the waiting room, and she sat, flicking her cigarette into the nearby ashtray, a golden bowl adorned with crows. "I'll be ready when fall gets here," she said, removing her hat and sunglasses. "Aren't we all?" Dr. Moonin said, disappearing behind the reception counter. "But then winter will get here and we'll be begging for the sun again." "Never fails," she said. "Come on with me. It'll be cooler downstairs where the therapy rooms are." Patience crushed her cigarette butt into the ashtray and stood. "Do you not have someone to man the desk?" "Unfortunately, no. It's just me and Dr. Hugan most days. I won't look a gift horse in the mouth, but business has been booming." "You don't have to tell me. I waited 2 months for this appointment." They were descending stairs, and Patience could feel the shift in temperature. Now her shoulders were riddled with goosebumps. "Well," Dr. Moonin said with a slight chuckle, "we often make patients wait for their first session. Sometimes the reason for their appointment is sorted out by the time it comes around." They had arrived at their destination, a series of rooms off a second, larger waiting room. Here she saw someone worrying the hem of their jacket and another person biting their nails. "Speaking of," he said, ushering them into a nearby door and shutting it, "what brings you here today?" Well, she was unsure of how to answer the question. She sat in a chair beside a table and lamp. "Also, just for peace of mind, we are 100% confidential. Although this is not technically medicine, we still abide by doctor-patient confidentiality. Old habits, as they say." He clicked a pen and sat with her file folder open on the desk. "Let me put it this way. What is it you're hoping to find?" Patience cleared her throat. "I feel terribly silly saying this out loud." "Don't. People come in here for reasons you couldn't imagine. I won't say I've seen it all, but I'm here to help." "Well, if you're asking what I'm hoping to find, I can tell you it's a feeling. She got another cigarette from her purse and lit it quickly, trying to hide her nerves in the action. Absolutely. We find those quite often, actually. Also, that's a lot easier than an actual object, let me tell you. Most of the time, as a matter of fact, most people that are looking for a physical thing aren't looking for that at all. But we can get into metaphysics later. Oh. In that case, I'm hoping to find happiness. Dr. Moonin scribbled on the paper. And when would you say you lost it? He asked, not missing a beat. I'm not certain, honestly. I'm not entirely joyless, you understand. I still laugh at the movies or at a joke. But being genuinely happy, I can't tell you the last time. Patience had lied then. She remembered clearly. Soft hands in the dark, inside jokes, records played with the curtains drawn. He produced another of those golden ashtrays with the crows and set it down close to her. Try to remember. It's going to make our chances of success a bit higher. But if you can't, just try to remember things that gave you that exact feeling once. How does this work exactly? She asked. Well, we find out what is lost and help you find it. That's not very helpful. He laughed, going to a nearby door and wheeling out a cart. Sorry, I get a little cryptic at times. Basically, he said, pointing to what appeared to be a television complete with bunny ears, this is going to display what you've lost, and in seeing it, you'll find it. It'll make sense after we're done. Dr. Moonin clicked the dial, a hollow clunk ringing through the machine. He placed a silver disc in her hand, a cord running to the screen. Are we going to watch some sci-fi special? She asked, trying to chuckle. She felt crazy, sitting in a basement with someone who claimed to be a doctor, static snow falling in the screen in front of her. Something like that, he said. He was adjusting the antenna on top of the television, systematically pointing towards her, away from her. Can I ask you something, Dr. Moonin? Of course, but please, try to focus on those happy thoughts. Yes. What if I don't like what I find? Is it possible to lose something else? Maybe something I want to get rid of? I'm sorry, Miss Paul, but this isn't hypnosis to get you to quit smoking. No, that's not... Patience began, but stopped as an image resolved on the screen, the hiss of static giving way to the singing of birds and insects. There was a field, corn bending reluctantly in a breeze, depicted in shades of gray. We're headed in the right direction. Dr. Moonin pulled his chair beside hers. The image grew fuzzy again as she looked at him. Focus, please. Again, whatever appears here is completely confidential. She turned back to the screen. You'll use the disc to go forward or back. There's no wrong choice. Just do whatever feels right. She touched the disc and the image faded, replaced by another. A dance hall, strewn with banners and balloons. Her finger brushed the disc again, and there was a hotel room, disheveled sheets, and a running shower. She could feel her cheeks flush. I promise there's no judgment. It's good we're getting such clear images. It gives me reason to believe we can find that happiness sooner than later. She went back to the cornfield. Her mouth tugged down as she began to cry. Patience, a voice from the television said. She nearly dropped the disc, hearing that voice. From off-screen, the voice continued. Hide and seek only works if you make it even remotely close to winnable. Crybaby, Constance. She heard her own voice, distant. Patience's hand shot up to her mouth. Constance ran into view, her back to the screen. She disappeared into the tall stalks. Patience heard their screams and giggles. Eventually, the screen faded to black, and the sound dissipated. Wait! Patience reached out and touched the screen, tapping her fingertips against the glass desperately. Miss Paul, please, continue. She nodded and sat back. She tapped the disc again. The black of the screen lightened until Patience was looking at a library. Students faded into the image, filling tables, perusing the books. She watched herself walk into view from the left, Constance from the right. Still coming over tonight? Past Patience asked. Wouldn't miss it, Constance said, a bit too loud for the librarian's liking. The two of them laughed behind their hands. Girls, please, the librarian whispered pointedly at them, shaking her head. Patience tapped the disc. The screen became a diner, then a movie theater, A graduation ceremony, the university cafeteria. She was flying through the images, a swelling in her heart. She stopped when the screen resolved into a wedding chapel. Patience was sitting outside on the steps, smoking a cigarette. The door opened, Constance slipping out. Patience, please. No, Connie. I thought this would be okay, but it's not. How can I be your maid of honor? How could you even ask that of me? Turn it off, please. Patience tossed the disc onto the cart with the television, but it continued to play. Past Patience was walking towards the screen now, tossing her bouquet on the ground. Have a nice life, Connie, she said, flicking her cigarette back towards the church. Patience, please come back. Constance was calling to her from the steps, but did not follow her. The door opened again, and a man in a tuxedo came out. Their conversation couldn't be heard over the sound of Patience's car door slamming, the engine turning over, and gravel being slung about as the car sped away. Connie was crying, mascara running down her cheeks. The Patience in the present hid her face in her hands. The screen turned black, and Dr. Moonin stood. He switched the television off again and wheeled it away. We haven't spoken since then, Patience told Dr. Moonin. I'm sorry to hear that, Dr. Moonin said. Well, I can say with certainty that I understand why you feel you've lost your happiness. I imagine it would be hard not to feel that way. Are you sure you can't just take it away? She asked, looking up and wiping the tears from her cheeks. I'm positive, Miss Paul. And regardless, I wouldn't, even if I could. Your happiness is not lost because of who you loved. It's lost because of the choices she made. I'm not so sure about that. Patience stood and adjusted her dress. I believe the way of finding what you've lost is not to no longer love Constance. In fact, I don't believe your happiness is completely lost to begin with. Either way, we will find it. We will work on this over our next 4 sessions together. He scribbled more in her file and tipped it closed. He smiled at her, a kind and understanding smile. Will we use the television again? She asked. If necessary, and if you're comfortable with that. From now on, it will be much more akin to normal therapy, though. Dr. Moonin extended his hand again, and she shook it. I hate to rush you off, but I'd like you to go home and take some time to process what we saw today. I'll see you in, let's say, 2 weeks. It's a date, she said, laughing wanly. Oh, and Ms. Paul? I would appreciate it if the confidentiality worked both ways. I don't want my invention out to the public just yet. Would you promise to keep that between us? Of course. Secrets make great friends, Dr. Moonin. He smiled at this and said, Trust works both ways. Please call me Richard. Richard Folsom. He extended his hand again as if it were the first time. She shook it, and it felt like a wink and a nudge. She ascended the stairs as the doctor called in another patient from the waiting room. The warmth didn't take long to pierce the cold on her skin. She was sweating again by the time she reached the front door. She stuck a cigarette into the corner of her mouth and lit it, flicking the flame away with a motion of her wrist. She donned her disguise once more and stepped out into the sun. The doctor's finster. Got another one, Mercy called out from the kitchen. She had been washing the dishes when she saw the van bumbling down the gravel driveway. No answer came to her, so she turned the water off and called out again. The van was nearly to the house. She sighed and dried her hands on a dish towel, walking to the door down to the basement. Babe? Yeah? Anna answered from below as Mercy opened the door. We've got another delivery. They're pulling up now. For real? Anna appeared at the bottom of the stairs, hands on her hips. Mercy mirrored her in the doorway. Yes, for real. Why else would I be saying it? Anna sighed. Okay, I'll send up the lift. Thank you, Mercy said, and shut the door. She approached the door as a silhouette appeared on the other side of the glass. Her hand was on the knob as soon as the knocking began. Yes? She asked, realizing she still had the dish towel in her hands. Mrs. Finster? A woman just outside asked. Mercy had a hard time not glancing to the plaque on the door that read Dr. Anna Finster and Dr. Mercy Finster. Yes? A sick-sounding whirring began behind her as she closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath. She had meant to have the lift looked at, but she hadn't had the chance. Anna was convinced it just needed some oil. Mercy would prefer none of them lost a hand trying to do so. She stepped outside and pulled the door to. She extended her hand and said, Mercy Finster. Mimi Valdez, she said, taking her hand. I've got a, delivery? I'm sorry, I'm not sure how... You're fine, Ms. Valdez. Are you new to Folsom? She was doing her best to hide the fact that it wasn't fine. What were they doing sending someone so wet behind the ears? Yeah, she said and laughed nervously. Just started last week. Been pretty run-of-the-mill, take this over there and bring that thing back kind of stuff. This is my first, Not to worry. Just bring it into the foyer. The porch steps can be a little tricky. She left the front door open as she entered the house again. Anna walked out of the kitchen eating a peach. What's the holdup? She said, around a chunk of fruit. They sent some kid to make the delivery, Mercy said as quietly as she could. For real? What happened to Arthur? Stop asking me if I'm for real. And how should I know what happened to Arthur? She sure as shit doesn't know. And are you seriously eating right before we have a job? Mercy, darling. Anna rested her hand on her shoulder. You're going to have an aneurysm. Go downstairs and prep. I'll bring it down. Fine, Mercy said, and walked to the basement door. A chorus of creaks and curses came up from the porch as Mimi struggled to get a gurney up the steps. Anna went out to assist her. Sorry, Mimi said when they got the gurney inside and shut the door. The two stood on opposite ends of the gurney, the lumpy black plastic lying quietly between them. You're fine. Will you be making the deliveries from now on? I don't think so. We've just been really busy today. I'll say, this is our third today. Anna moved to open the gate to the lift and directed Mimi to push the gurney inside. She shut the gate and sent the lift down, the agonized groans of the cables filling the air. If you don't mind me asking, Mimi said over the sound, what exactly do you do here? Well, you can come down and see for yourself if you'd like. Either that or wait up here. We've got plenty of food. She walked to the basement door and said, It's up to you. Mimi considered for a moment, but her curiosity was piqued. She stood at the top of the stairs and watched Anna's back descend into the dark below. A soft glow kept it from being completely black, but she cautiously made her way down. Mercy was retrieving the gurney from the lift as Mimi made it to the bottom of the stairs. She was now wearing protective goggles and her hair was pulled away from her face. A long apron and gloves reaching her elbows obscured the rest of her body. Mercy paused and looked to Anna. Anna was donning her own equipment and must have felt the glare on her. Without looking back, she said, I invited Miss Valdez to see what we do. If she makes more deliveries, I think it's important for her to know. Her words were coming out with puffs of white steam. You're impossible. Mercy brought the gurney to the middle of the room and touched a lamp hanging from the ceiling. The area was flooded with light. Anna moved to the source of the soft glow, a series of computer monitors. She tapped their screens. Just stay out of the way, Mercy said to Mimi. Please, she said as an afterthought. Mercy tugged on the zipper of the body bag, dragging it from one end to the other. Let's begin. She pulled the edges of the bag away, a blooming black flower. Inside was somewhere between a corpse and a skeleton. Mimi covered her mouth. Mercy scoffed. What did you expect? Initiating scan, Anna interrupted. She pressed a few buttons on the console, and a horizontal line of light came from the lamp overhead. It slowly moved downward, the light illuminating the patch of red hair on the scalp. The light fell down into one of its empty eye sockets and momentarily illuminated the skin there. Calibrating, Anna said, and Mercy grunted in agreement. Mimi found herself moving closer. She was wondering what she had expected. After all, she had been the one who got the black bag from the morgue, put it on the stretcher, and loaded it into the van. At the same time, it was easy for her to imagine it as any other parcel. But here it was now, vivisected and laid bare. What's happening? She asked sheepishly. Currently, we're scanning the exterior and interior of the body to get the proper dimensions. Anna was pointing to one of the monitors where a skull was forming line by line. Anna tapped the screen and dragged, showing that it was being built as a 3D shape. Mimi looked and remembered the CAT scan she had a while back. Thinking back to the suffocating tube that roared around her caused her to choke a bit. You don't have to have the big, machine, the tube with all the magnets or whatever. No, Mercy said, placing a strand of hair from the scalp into a vial. This is something we've been working on for quite some time alongside the Folsom Group, but we aren't ready to announce anything, hence why you will be making deliveries to our home instead of a hospital or laboratory. She fed the vial into the console, assuming you'll be making any more deliveries, that is. The light had made its way to the body's ankles. It reached the tip of its toes on the right side. The left foot was apparently missing, Mimi was now noticing, and then blinked out. On the screen, there was now a replication of what lay on the table. "Do you have what you need, dear?" Anna asked. Mercy made her grunt of agreement once more as she collected a patch of skin from the body's arm. "Initiating reconstruction. Confirmation of disposal?" "Confirmation of disposal," Mercy said absent-mindedly as she was analyzing what was appearing on the screen. There was a moment of silence. "Okay, I guess I'll do it." Anna grabbed the gurney and pushed it out of the tent of light being cast from the lamp. She walked to a far wall and was lost in the darkness. There was a loud clang and the screech of metal as the door was pulled open. The sound of a blazing fire filled the room and everything was bathed in orange light. Anna's shadow danced along the walls as the flames flickered. She zipped the bag shut again and heaved it into the flames. Mimi let out a small gasp, but it was lost in the sound of the door being shut again. "I think this one's going to do well," Mercy said as Anna returned to the console. Mimi had seen the curl of smoke rising from the house as she approached. She had imagined something quaint, the doctor's finster enjoying a fireside chat. "The program's certainly getting better. It's already filled in the missing appendages." She pointed to where the model of the body now had 2 feet. "Oh, wow, record time." Mercy craned her head to the side, stretching her neck. "Not having much DNA to go off of isn't helping, but I think we should be fine. Any positive IDs?" "Yeah, we got him," Anna said. Mimi could see a photo on the screen, a selfie of a red-haired man, handsome and happy. Liam Homestead. Looks like he was reported missing a little while back, a hiking trip he didn't return from. "That explains the missing bits," Mercy said, chuckling. "What?" Mimi said, her voice cracking. She cleared her throat and began again. "What happens now?" "Magic," Anna said. The light from the lamp changed, casting different hues. It was fuzzy at first, but the 3D model on the screen was taking shape in the room with them. It was the man, Liam Homestead, standing naked with his arms outstretched. Mimi could swear he was looking right at her. Mercy walked around the model, examining fine details. She suggested an edit here, a correction there. Anna complied. A new freckle appeared on his shoulder. The hair on his belly was made just a tad denser. "I say we ship it," Mercy said definitively. "Agreed." Anna pressed some keys on the console and walked to Mercy at Liam's side. "Mimi, are you okay?" "A little confused, I think." "Just give it a moment." Anna placed her arm around Mercy's waist, and Mercy leaned her head against Anna's shoulder. "This is our favorite part." A cylinder of glass rose from the ground, meeting the lamp above. Mimi stepped closer as a cloud hissed from the lamp. It swirled and shook, flashing impossible colors. It reminded her of a nebula, of a swirling spiral of glitter in a snow globe, impossible to follow and equally impossible to not watch. Gradually, the cloud began to slow its churn, and they watched as it began to fill the model of Liam. Strands of sand became a femur, became his lower intestine, became his tongue. Eventually, all was still. The glass lowered to the ground and the lamp switched off, the normal overhead lights turning on. And so, Mimi was in a basement with 2 doctors and a newborn man. Liam blinked and lowered his arms to his side. "That was incredible," Mimi said, breathless. "Right?" Anna said. "Sorry for being snippy," Mercy said and kissed Anna's cheek. Anna kissed her back. "Do you know what happens now?" Anna asked, turning to Mimi. "I'm supposed to bring something back with me. Is he the return package?" "Yes. You'll take him to the hospital. His family will be notified, and he will go home. He will be monitored from there." For real? Mimi asked. Anna chuckled and Mercy sighed audibly. I mean, surely they'll know. I think you'll be surprised, Ms. Valdez. People don't often question miracles. Liam will have to relearn himself, but we're working on that as well. Soon there won't be any difference between what is born here and the person they're made from. With that being said, Folsom should have supplied you with a dry cleaning bag containing some of Mr. Homestead's belongings. If you make another delivery, it'll be easier to just bring that in along with the body. I thought that was a delivery to someone else. In a way, it is. You'll be delivering it to him. We recommend he travel up front with you, buckled in. Anna gently wrapped her hand around Liam's arm and walked the two of them to the lift. We're going to clean up here. You should go ahead and take him back now. Hopefully, we'll be seeing you again soon. But not too soon, Mercy called out. Tell Folsom we're taking a break for a day or two. Anna shut the gate and the lift cried out again as it rose to the upper level. Mimi found herself pinned to the corner, staring at Liam. He blinked and breathed steadily. When the lift stopped, she waited a moment, but it was clear he wasn't going to do anything about it. She squeezed past him and opened the gate. She walked towards the front door and he followed. The dry cleaning bag in the van did in fact have clothes that fit Liam. She handed them to him and was grateful that he slid them on by himself. He opened the passenger door and as Mimi climbed in, he was buckling himself in. At first, Mimi wasn't sure what to do or say. Instead, she turned on the radio as they bumped down the gravel driveway back toward civilization. A piano melody began to play and Liam smiled. Do you know this one? Mimi asked. A single tear rolled down his cheek.
Delicious. Meatloaf lay on the kitchen floor, sighing heavily. He looked up at George as he was making his morning coffee. He sighed again. Oh, Loaf, you're so pitiful. George bent down and rubbed his belly and his face. Tumbleweeds of white fur flew up and around in the morning sun. Shuffling footsteps entered the kitchen, and Meatloaf was happy to see Lars. He wagged his tail. Lars's tired face lightened. This made Meatloaf even happier. Did you sleep okay? George asked. Not bad. Weird dreams again. Lars got the milk from the fridge as George poured them both coffee. I'm sorry. Do you think it's the meds? Could be, Lars said, scratching himself. Who knows? We'll try to get to bed earlier tonight. Maybe that will help. George kissed him, and they sat down to breakfast. Meatloaf stood and lingered below the table. Lars petted him, absent-mindedly. This was a prime opportunity for a missed morsel. Meatloaf sniffed loudly. They ate their breakfast and talked about the plan for the day. When they had finished eating, George cleared his throat. I've got a surprise for you, he said. When I took Loaf to the vet yesterday, they had this free trial thing. Meatloaf was excited to hear his name. He sniffed George expectantly. He sat and pawed at George's knee. Sitting and shaking were his expertise. What kind of trial thing? Lars asked. He was getting his shots, and the vet said they could go ahead and inject a microchip thing in his skin. He's already microchipped. I thought you knew that. Well, it's a little different. George opened an app on his phone called Leica. A dog in a fishbowl astronaut helmet appeared on the screen with a spinning circle. George placed his phone against Meatloaf's head. The circle stopped spinning, and his phone made a cheerful ding. It's really basic, but I thought you'd really get a kick. Happy, his voice chimed in a Vocaloid voice. Wait, is that? Lars asked, smiling. Meatloaf? He called to the dog. Curious, the phone said as Meatloaf tilted his head. You want to go anticipation. Outside? Excitement. The voice could barely be heard over the sound of Meatloaf's nails against the kitchen tile and his excited barks. That's awesome, Lars said. Right? So it's still really basic. It doesn't make him understand us any better, and it doesn't talk in complete sentences or anything. But I thought it was neat, George explained. Yeah, that's so cool. Impatient. Meatloaf did his ready-to-go-outside dance by the door. You said the O word. You better take him. Lars put on his coat and put Meatloaf's leash on. All the while, the phone chimed and shouted about Meatloaf's glee. When they had left, George cleared away the dishes. It was nice to see Lars excited about something. He felt a small sense of accomplishment. Must mark, his phone said, interrupting his thoughts. The app was still running on his phone. Curious? He tried closing the app, but a notification told him it must remain active for 24 hours, per the terms of the trial, and then it would be deactivated. Hungry, the voice said. Food. George scrubbed the dishes. Shame, it said lowly. The door opened and Lars brought Meatloaf back inside. He got into the neighbor's trash, Lars said. George glanced at his phone. I think he knows he wasn't supposed to, George said. Of course he knows. We've been getting on to him for months. That's not good, Loaf, Lars said in a low tone. Shame, the phone said, as Meatloaf laid on the floor and averted his eyes. Lars straightened up and stared at George's phone. Told you, George said. Lars proceeded to apologize profusely to the pile of fluff and sadness on the floor. The phone immediately began to chime excitedly again. Maybe we should feed him before he goes out. That might help. He said he was hungry. Hungry. Thirsty, the phone said in agreement as Meatloaf sniffed around the kitchen. Lars poured kibble into his bowl and got him some fresh water. As he was prone to do, the dog devoured his food. The phone bleeped again. Delicious. George and Lars got ready for the day. They stood at the door and said their goodbyes to Loaf. Excited, George's phone said. I'm sorry, buddy, but you gotta stay here. We won't be gone long, Lars said. Confused? George opened the door and they walked to the car. Confused, his phone said again. Sorry, it won't turn off until tomorrow. I guess I didn't read the fine print. That's okay, I just feel bad, Lars said as he started the car. George attempted to lower the volume, but that didn't work. Before they were even out of the driveway, the phone said, Lonely. The two looked at each other and sighed. George returned to the house, and when he opened the door, his phone exploded with glee as Meatloaf barked and jumped. He got the leash and brought the dog to the car. One of us can just stay in the car with him, George said. They drove about the small town doing errands. All the while, the phone said, Curious. Lars cracked the window in the back, and Meatloaf immediately jammed his snout out the window, sniffing quickly. I wonder what it must be like, Lars said, looking back at the dog through the rearview mirror. To smell everything all the time. He obviously seems to like it, George said, and waved his phone in the air as it shouted. They chuckled and talked about where they needed to go and do in town, acknowledging Meatloaf, but still trying to have their conversation. This must be what it's like to have children, George thought. Their errands took a bit longer than they had anticipated. The winter sun had gone down by the time they returned home. It didn't help that they had accidentally taken the road close to the dog park, and Meatloaf was insistent on going. They carried their bags of groceries in and prepared dinner. They all laid on the couch and watched a scary movie. George gripped Lars's arm as the violin screeched, and the movie's heroine was about to get axed when the phone chimed and said, Tired. George screamed, and Lars laughed. Meatloaf was confused. Sleep was hard to come by as the couple heard Meatloaf's interior monologue. A car alarm went off outside, and Meatloaf immediately barked. Alert! Danger! The phone screamed. After a few minutes, it had not stopped. I'm going to take him out, George said, sitting at the edge of the bed. When Lars offered to do it, he said he'd go so Lars could get some rest. George put on some sweats and his coat. Come on, Loaf, he said, and took the dog out. George's eyes were drooping. He yawned loudly and stretched. Meatloaf was standing still as a statue in their backyard. Alert, his phone said. Somewhere out in the dark, a twig snapped. Suddenly, the dog tore off through the yard, yanking the leash from George's hand. Damn it, Loaf! He shouted, but the dog did not heed him. He squeezed beneath the fence, and George had to go through the front of the house and around. He used the locator app on his phone to see he hadn't gone very far. Traipsing through the nearby woods, he called out to Meatloaf. Hungry, the phone said. He was getting closer to the dot that represented the dog. Food, hungry. He turned the flashlight on his phone on, and there in the light was Meatloaf, his white fur stained red at the mouth. His eyes grew wide and his teeth crunched through something small and furry. Delicious. Food, delicious. Hungry, delicious.